What is it? It's your father's lightsaber. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
When they were first introduced in a brilliant stroke of CGI back in 1977, the lightsaber overnight became definitively the most iconic weapon in all of cinema. A blade of varying colour protruding from a hilt of metal that took the world by storm. Today, you can see lightsabers everywhere, from TV screens to toy stores to playgrounds where 5-year-olds will bash each other with said weapons. That being said, very similar to fencing in the real world, George Lucas's vision for lightsaber combat expanded beyond the scope of the original 6 movies, causing lightsaber combat to be classified into 7 classical forms, which, due to the EU, has only been expanded upon. For that reason, I decided to conduct a holistic examination on the forms of lightsaber combat, so be prepared as this will be an extremely long video due to the fact that, as befitting the most iconic weapon in all of cinema, it does have a tad bit of content surrounding it. I was tempted to divide this into various sections, which I will list below. However, I decided to make it a one big compilation video, as we all have stuff to do and we all need something on the background. Without further ado, let us begin. Lightsaber combat, also known as Jedi combat, referred to several schools of martial arts specialized in, though not limited to, fighting with a lightsaber. Such fighting forms were required to compensate or take advantage of unique attributes of lightsabers, notably the odd balance of the weapon, all of the weight being in the hilt rather than the blade, and the omnidirectional cutting edge of the blade. The most prominent lightsaber-oriented combat styles were the 7 classical forms practiced by the Jedi Order, though other organizations were known to have developed their own styles and methods off of these. An example being the Sith, which developed the combat-oriented Dunmok technique, which exploited one's psychological vulnerability in order to gain an edge in physical combat. The various combat forms owed their unique focuses and methods in the eras in which they were created, as they were oftentimes developed as an answer to a new generations of weapons technology or a new war. For example, the dueling-centric Makushi form, specialized in by Count Dooku by the way, was created during a time when the Dark Jedi and the Rogue Force sensitives ran rampant through the galaxy in the conflict known as the 100-Year Darkness, and lightsaber duels became more of a common occurrence than it had in prior eras. Whereas Surisu, the main defensive form used by Obi-Wan Kenobi, was developed when such confrontations were rare, and Jedi were more likely to confront blaster-wielding adversaries and gunslingers as well as bounty hunters rather than lightsaber duelists. Throughout the millennia since the lightsaber's creation, the art of dueling with them developed into 7 classical forms and numerous other styles. It was difficult to master for a number of reasons. One of them had been all that the weight of the lightsaber had within its hilt. It had been said that only a Force-sensitive individual could completely master lightsaber combat, though there have been some great non-Force-sensitive duelists such as the Mandalorian Pre Vizsla or General Grievous. All 7 traditional lightsaber forms included the same basic techniques as ancient sword fighting styles, such as defensive postures, overhand strikes, parries, and counters in classical combat. A riposte was a technique where a user struck an opponent after deflecting or blocking an attack and was often used in combat. The lightsaber was a very versatile weapon, owing it to its unique lightness and omnidirectional cutting ability. It could be wielded with 1 or 2 hands, with the Jedi being trained to use the Force as a conduit between the wielder and the weapon. Through this bond of the Force, the blade became an extension of their being. It moved with the instinct as though it were part of the body. The Jedi's attunement to the Force accounted for the almost superhuman agility and reflex illustrating the usage of their lightsaber, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi gaining mental oneness in his duel with General Grievous on Utapau, with him able to deflect over 40 strikes per second from the droid general. Early in the weapon's history, when the Sith were numerous, the art of the lightsaber dueling flourished. In later periods, however, only rarely would Jedi face an adversary with a weapon capable of repelling a lightsaber such as the Cortosis blade. Although the weapon was basically weightless, 2-handed slashes were the most common movement. This was because the momentum was still needed to cut through solid objects, as solid objects were repelled by the blade arc until they were changed to gas or plasma. Therefore, momentum was required to counteract the initial repelling force. The stronger the swing, the faster and easier the blade would cut. If little force was applied to the swing, the repelling force of the blade would arc back and leave shallow cuts. When 2 lightsaber blades came in contact with each other, the 2 repelling forces that composed both of them due to the plasma made the blade appear to be solid. Also, the field that caused the energy to arc back into the hilt caused some gyroscopic effects. While technically weightless, the blade still had some resistance to changes in motion, with the slightest gyroscopic effect being easily controlled by a trained force user, but could become problematic for the untrained eye. When lightsaber technology was first being developed to the point where they became a viable weapon, becoming the standard weapon of the Jedi Order by 7000 BBY, a combat form that accounted for the abilities and weaknesses of the weapon was undisputably required. Even though it shared many principles and techniques with fencing, Form 1 Shi-Cho was a highly simplified style based on age-old fencing principles that defined the types of attacks, parries, body zones, and practice drills that could be utilized with the lightsaber in standard, non-rigorous combat and typically only sparring sessions. When Darksiders and Fallen Jedi began to arise, lightsaber duels became almost routine activity, and Shi-Cho was simply not up for the task, as it didn't address lightsaber to lightsaber combat explicitly. This necessitated the development of Form 2 Makashi, the form utilized by Count Dooku in the prequel era, a precise and efficient fighting form geared towards lightsaber dueling. The style's prevalence being in this era produced many great dueling masters the galaxy had ever seen, a notable example being, in my opinion, the greatest Sith duelist of all time, Tulak Hord, one of the original early Sith Lords who led a currently unknown Sith campaign against the Jedi Order, where he conquered hundreds of worlds for the early Sith Empire. Makashi was eventually rendered partially obsolete due to the increased distribution and combination of blaster bolts and other range energy weapons. Due to this, the third form, Sarisu, was created, an extrapolitan and development of Shi-Cho blast-deflecting training. Sarisu emphasized defensive coverage, characterized by tight and efficient movement. True Form 3 Master was considered invincible by many, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, the style was not without its detractors, who criticized its focus on defense at the expense of offense. As an answer to the weaknesses of Sarisu, both Ataru Form 4 and Shien Form 5 were developed side by side. Both were highly aggressive combat forms used by notable duelists Plo Koon and Master Yoda, the former focusing on speed and agility, the latter on strength and attack moves. Notably, Shien exploited the lightsaber's ability to deflect blaster bolts by deliberately deflecting shots towards opponents. Later, a new, more advanced Form 5 variant known as the Gem So, the style utilized by Anakin Skywalker, was developed, focusing on aggressive lightsaber dueling rather than defensive counters. While Forms 4 and 5 proved highly effective, many more conservative Jedi that were put off by aggressive focuses set to work to creating a form that balanced all of the focuses and philosophies with overall moderation, in better keeping with Jedi philosophy. The result was the sixth form, Nightman, notably used by the Jedi and later Sith Lord Exar Kun. Developed from the Jarkai dual-blade fencing combat style, Nightman was a gateway to fantastic lightsaber skill without a focus on power or aggression, and became known as the Diplomat's form, though it has ironically become the favored style of the fallen Jedi turned Sith Lord Exar Kun, a masterful lightsaber duelist who was among the greatest the galaxy would ever see. Due to his obvious skill, Kun came to consider himself the greatest duelist in galactic history, though he ultimately met his match in the dead Gemso specialist Ulic Keldroma. However, I personally have a different opinion. Kun would go on to defeat Vodosios Bast, the Jedi Battle Master of the day, who had trained for over 600 years in lightsaber combat, and wielded one of the earliest saber staffs, creating the perfect weapon from schematics provided by an ancient Sith holocron. By the time of the First Jedi Purge, as instated by Darth Sion, Nihilus, and Traya, Juyo Form 7 had been created, an advanced and extremely aggressive form. Juyo required high level of mastery of multiple forms to be studied, as it cut perilously close to Sith intensity of focus on combat ability. Due to this, it was perfect for both Darth Sion and Darth Maul, some of the most heavily combat-centralized Sith Lords in the entirety of the lore. Specifically, Juyo drew on the agile footwork of Makashi, the tight aggressive motions of Shien, and the fluid style of Nightman. Masters of the form were loath to teach it to those with proven recklessness, and the rarity of practitioners left it in a state of only partial development for almost 1,000 years after the Army of Light disbanded with the Ruusan reformation. 4 of the only known practitioners alive following the First Jedi Purge were Jedi Masters Rock Lamar, Zez Kael, Kavar, and Jedi Master Atris. With the advent of the Great Galactic War, a galactic conflict that saw the resurgence of the reconstituted Sith Empire as heralded by Sith Lord Vitiate, and the re-emergence of the old Sith Empire alongside it, the Jedi were once again in widespread confrontation with their bitter enemy, the Sith. During the interim, the Sith Lords retained a full early access to traditional forms, and they were in use within the Empire as early as the Jedi Civil War, with such notables as the Empire's Wrath Scourge studying forms 7, 4, and 3. There is little doubt the Sith also used this time to develop their own combat styles, although there are a few records indicating clearly what they were. This was matched by the Jedi with the development of Juyo Kos, a refinement of the already lethal Juyo to meet the demands of these dangerous times, which saw frequent and brutal engagements between Jedi and Sith. One of the most notable duelists of this era was the Sith Lord Darth Malgus, who commonly engaged Jedi Master and later Grandmaster Satele Shan in notable duels such as the retaking of Korriban and the Battle of Alderaan, in which Malgus proved to be the superior combatant due to its overpowering Djemso stylus. I have a video detailing Malgus's full power coming out as well as his lightsaber ability, and why it is my personal opinion Malgus is the greatest fighter, and I say that, fighter, in Star Wars. Not the best duelist, just the best fighter. Anyway, moving on from my Malgus rant, this point of view is supported by comments from the Jebran Hulus during his beef duel with Teneb Kel. Notable duelists during this period included Jarrett Cardaean, a master of the aforementioned Form 7 variant, and August Din, who attained his advanced skill level through endless practice in an attempt to compensate for his weak aptitude with the Force. On the Sith side, as mentioned previously, were Vindican, the Sith Inquisitor, and Malgus, who were notably the first Sith Lords to crossplay with the Jedi in over 300 years, their opponents being the Zabrak Jedi Battlemaster Kao Sendirach, who managed to bisect Vindican, and the future Jedi Grandmaster Satele Shan, who managed to escape in Malgus and her's first engagement. During the New Sith Wars, a Twi'lek duelist known as Kasim rose to prominence among the Sith, becoming the lightsaber instructor at the Korriban Academy for the Brotherhood of Darkness. Many of his students would go on to be excellent duelists in their own right, a notable example being Darth Bane, a rival for the aforementioned Malgus. In fact, when Bane and Kasim engaged one another after Bane's rebellion against the Brotherhood, Kasim demonstrated an aptitude for Dark Jarkai dual blade fencing, providing with an edge over Bane due to the latter's lack of training against such armament. Bane regarded Kasim as the finest duelist of the era, possibly the greatest to ever exist thus far, and he only prevailed thanks to a superior grasp of the Force. Eventually, Bane later killed Kasim's Jedi counterpart, Ruskal Su. Noted by avid combat enthusiast Dooku to be appalling, with the final battle of Ruusan and the subsequent Ruusan reformation, most of the Sith and Darksider organizations in the galaxy were utterly annihilated or driven into hiding, and the Jedi lightsaber combat experiences radical changes as a consequence. The dueling-centric Makashi style was rendered absolutely obsolete due to its lack of effectiveness against blaster-wielding opponents, or multiple opponents, as well as the simple lack of lightsaber-wielding opponents in the galaxy outside of the Jedi Order. The more obscure weapon variants likewise suffered. By 32 BBY, the usage of the double-bladed lightsabers in actual combat as opposed to training was practically unheard of. Despite this, the era produced one of the greatest lightsaber duelists ever to exist, Grandmaster Yoda. The eventual Grandmaster of the Jedi Order mastered all 7 classical forms over the course of his 900-year lifespan, but specialized in the acrobatic, agile style of Ataru. As the style's broad swordplay and heavy use of acrobatics combined for his lack of height and reach made him a devastating opponent to behold. His fighting form was a masterful demonstration of many standard components of Ataru, and was a wonder to behold, confounding even Darth Sidious and Mace Windu themselves. Other great duelists to arise during this period included Count Dooku, who stubbornly specialized in Makashi, despite the style's apparent obsolescence, considering it among the highest of fighting forms. Seo Ol-Ukumaka, who ranked among the greatest Jedi warriors before renouncing the lightsaber and focusing on the star fighting, which he felt was a purer technique, and Mace Windu. Windu was a Juyo specialist who worked towards completing the form, as a lack of duels with the self-control necessary to practice Form 7 left it still under development. The result was the Vapad style, named for a predator native to the moons of Seraphon, a dangerous style that cut close to the dark side, requiring Jedi to allow themselves to enjoy the thrill of battle, channeling their own fury and dark side energies while feeding off the aggression of the energy, creating a superconducting loop to empower oneself in battle. Windu developed the style with the aid of fellow Jedi Swordmaster Sora Bulk, and only trained his own Padawan Deva Balaba in the style. Notably, Bulk eventually taught the Jedi Maverick Quinlan Voss elements of Vapad during the Amnesiac's Jedi retaining, so he said nothing of the style, and Voss refrained from applying it after learning more of it. Among the Sith, Darth Sidious's apprentice Darth Maul proved to be an exceptional duelist capable of matching Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the most highly trained in the history of the Sith Order, and proved that the Sith were deadlier than ever. Maul was instructed in several obscure combat forms, notably considering himself a master of the corrupt version of Juya, in addition to his highly developed skills as a martial combatant. Maul also wielded a double-bladed saber staff. Creating the weapon after a failed engagement against Soleri Unkramanga, drew him to the conclusion that a simple one-bladed lightsaber were too limiting. Maul went on to defeat the Jedi with a more unorthodox armament, and the Jedi's inexperience with the weapon and his own skill with it provided Maul an edge over many of his opponents, and great swordmasters such as Anun Bondara and Qui-Gon Jinn fell before his blade. Maul was only defeated by Jinn's Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi when he dropped his guard and got overconfident, a cockiness that would remain in Maul to the end of his days. When Maul was thought dead, Sidious was forced to find a replacement and a placeholder apprentice while Anakin Skywalker grew up, recruiting Dooku after he left the Jedi Order with the death of his Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn and dubbing him Darth Tyrannus, while Obi-Wan Kenobi would go on to train Anakin Skywalker, the rising star of the Jedi Order. Skywalker specialized in Form 5, as an aggressive fighting form was a good match to his bold, confrontational personality type as well as immense brutish physical strength that was greatly similar to Darth Malgus from the Old Republic. However, Skywalker's rapid advancement only fed his ego, and he came to consider himself a match for Yoda, as he was given a sobering reminder of how much he still had to learn when Tyrannus cut off his arm on Geonosis, ending their intense physical bout. Kenobi himself specialized in Sarisu, adopting the style after coming to the conclusion that Ataru's lack of defensive capabilities was the reason that Qui-Gon Jinn had died on Naboo at the hands of Darth Maul, which he was ultimately correct in. While the defensive fighting form stood him in good stead against blaster-wielding opponents, his own confrontation with Tyrannus went less well, as Dooku's precise blade work as well as eidetic perception of the Ataru style simply worked around Kenobi's staunch defense and offense easily. As the Clone Wars conflict ravaged across the galaxy, we would bring about a multitude of changes in lightsaber combat, as the more moderate forms the Jedi had specialized in for the last millennia proved lacking on the battlefield, calling for quick rush mastery of specialist combat styles. Notably, all the 9-man practitioners involved the Battle of Geonosis perishing in combat, primarily due to a lack of mastery of the form. In preparation for the Sith-orchestrated war, Dooku recruited several other duelists into his personal career of dark acolytes, notable being such as the fallen Sora Bulk and the Rakatai warlord Asajj Ventress. Dooku went so far with this that Dooku even eventually trained Ventress and believed that she would help him betray Darth Sidious and become the Dark Lord of the Sith. However, this never actually happened, as Sidious eventually caught on to Tyrannus' scheme and ordered Ventress to be killed. Despite this, Ventress' skill with the lightsaber was sufficient enough to impress both Dooku and Sidious, and she was provided with further instruction from the former, notably in the usage of Markashi lightsaber combat. Dooku also trained the Kaleesh reborn cyborg General Grievous in lightsaber combat, which Grievous was capable of learning because of the enhanced speed and reflexes of his mechanical body, as well as downloading all lightsaber forms into his mechanical brain. Grievous would become one of the most prolific Jedi hunters of all eras, collecting their lightsabers as grisly trophies, and defeating such notables as Shaak Ti and Ith Koth, as well as dueling with Mace Windu aboard a moving train to a stalemate, with Mace Windu using the Force to end the engagement after Windu begun to utilize and replicate the style of Vapad, which Mace deemed that would make the cyborg general unstoppable. Other great duelists that became casualties of the war included Sora Bulk and Depa Billaba, leaving Mace Windu as the last master of the party who did not fall to the dark side while utilizing the form. By the end of the war, Dooku and Grievous were slain by Skywalker and Kenobi respectively. Their vastly increased skill marked them as two of the finest duelists the Jedi Order had ever produced, and Dooku credited Skywalker as the finest Agento stylist that he had ever seen in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, with Mace Windu recognizing Kenobi as the master of Sarisu. Not a master, the master. The polar embodiment of everything that Sarisu stood for. Windu's Vapad style also faced its own ultimate test during its confrontation with Darth Sidious in the Chancellor's office. Revealed to be the Republic's Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, Palpatine's advanced combat skills and dark side powers allow him to strike down Aegon Kola and Satian instantaneously, with Kit Fisto falling soon after. Windu was left alone to battle the vicious Sith Lord. Fisto's swordsmanship barely enabled him to hold off Sidious before he too fell. 3 of the best swordsmen on the Jedi Council were now dead, forcing Windu to fully channel his Vapad unto himself. The superconducting loop of power formed by Windu's Vapad left both combatants in a content of indefinite length, until Windu managed to seize the tactical advantage in combat, disarming Palpatine and seemingly defeating the Dark Lord of the Sith. However, Ridley's apparent victory wouldn't last long, as Anakin Skywalker intervened, defecting to the Sith and cutting off Windu's sword hand, leaving him vulnerable to Palpatine's Sith lightning, which he was later absolutely obliterated by. Mace Windu, one of the greatest duelists in the Jedi Order, considered only second to Yoda, was Jed via a combination of being off guard and his sword hand being bisected. Skywalker, now rechristened as Darth Vader, would spearhead the sack of the Jedi Temple in Operation Nightfall, personally felling many of the Jedi within due to desiring to enhance his own power. Including the Jedi Swordmaster and Council member Sindralig was unable to hold out against Vader's brutal intensity. Vader would only find his match in his former mentor Kenobi, with Kenobi's mastery of defensive Ceresu proving to be the perfect foil to Vader's all-out offense. In one of the greatest lightsaber duels of all time in both Jedi and Sith history, concurrent with the one occurring in the Senate chambers, Kenobi would give ground before Darth Vader's relentless attack, guiding the battle to the location of his choice and seizing the tactical advantage by executing a triple Maquis strike. Overestimating his abilities, Vader attempted to vault over Kenobi but was dismembered by his former master and left to die on the shore of Mustafar. He only survived when Palpatine, fresh from his own great contest with Yoda, rescued him. Realizing that the new Sith Order could not be brought down through martial might, Kenobi and Yoda went into hiding, traveled in exile to Tatooine and Dagobah respectively, where they would remain until the rise of Luke Skywalker. With the Jedi Order virtually exterminated, lightsaber combat developed slow to a crawl, and most efforts were spearheaded by the Sith Order, which currently reigned the galaxy in secret. However, the combat forms themselves would still be preserved in the surviving records and holocrons held by Palpatine, as well as among the Sith themselves. Nonetheless, this period of time saw the rise of Darth Vader, one of the greatest lightsaber duelists in all of galactic history. Now encumbered with his heavy life support armor, Vader was forced to customize and adjust his lightsaber technique to compensate for the bulky, heavy armor that he now was forced to wear all the time. His resulting combat form included elements from numerous techniques of combat and every traditional lightsaber form, relying on brute force and precision to counter the more acrobatic fighting forms the Jedi survivors favored. With this unique, somewhat perfect and archaic fighting method, Vader became the most prolific Jedi hunter of all time. Vader's skills as a duelist would also carry over to several of his apprentices, such as Starkiller and Karas. Starkiller practiced Juya and Ceresu, while favoring a Shien-style reverse script very similar to Ahsoka Tano, and was able to best skilled duelists as Kazdan Paratas, Ram Koda, and even Darth Vader himself when he reached his prime as a lightsaber combatant. He was able to compete and contend with Shakti not far off from his prime, but had to use the Force to best her in the end. Karas was able to create a trapeze fighting style, a combination of traditional Psykrati, aerials, dueling, and Form 7 lightsaber combat. Starkiller ultimately rebelled against his master and eventually managed to defeat Vader before perishing in an altercation with Emperor Palpatine himself. This era also saw the emergence of the Emperor's Shadow Guard and the Imperial Saber Guard, two notable sects of somewhat Force users. The Shadow Guardsmen favored lightsaber pikes and typically operated as Palpatine's enforcers, while the Saber Guards were provided with standard lightsabers and were provided with the prerequisite training and tutoring in how to use them, strongly favoring Shien-style reverse scripts in combat. Both groups were highly effective on the battlefield, turning entire battles on their head, though considerably less so against trained Jedi duelists such as Starkiller or eventually his clone and Maulkiller. Arguably the greatest lightsaber duelist of all time, Luke Skywalker was an absolute natural the first time he picked up the weapon in A New Hope. After only a single training session with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Skywalker was already highly competent at blast deflection, and he improved his technique over the next 3 years through pure improvisation. Within months, he was skilled enough to overcome Vader's former student Karas, a practitioner of Form 7 lightsaber combat and the creator of the trapeze style. His capabilities were further developed during his training under Grandmaster Yoda, the wisest and most powerful Jedi up to that point. And Skywalker's resulting combat style was an instinctual mimicry of Vader's personalized variation of Form 5, with elements of Ataru and Ceresu included. By 3 ABY, he was capable to hold his own against Darth Vader, outperforming many of the fully trained Jedi Knights the Dark Lord had engaged in the past. Merely a year after this encounter, Skywalker bested Vader with a furious demonstration of his own technique following a rage amplification when Darth Vader prodded at Luke's mind utilizing Dun Mok, utilizing a technique of psychological warfare spearheaded by the Sith, which was utilized on him heavily throughout the Clone Wars by Count Dooku and specifically aboard the Invisible Hand. Although Vader was much older, slower, as well as conflicted and not wanting to kill his son, The feat of besting Vader in any capacity or facet is absolutely phenomenal, as Darth Vader, in my personal opinion, is the fifth greatest duelist in all of Star Wars Legends continuity, perhaps even fourth, depending on your take on the Darth Vader vs. Yoda matchup. Skywalker would eventually meet his match in Lumaya, a Vader-trained Dark Jedi turned Sith acolyte. Lumaya wielded a unique and esoteric light whip against Grandmaster Luke, with lashes of both energy and metals. As Lumaya noted, Luke's Jedi training only prepared him for a weapon that was either energy or solid, not one that was both. Luke would quickly adapt, constructing a Shoto lightsaber very akin to that of Yoda's and wielding it as a secondary weapon, allowing him to engage the whip's energy tendrils with one blade while shredding the solid ones with the other. Scark would eventually develop to the point where he could compete with the resurrected Emperor Palpatine himself in duels, slicing off the Sith Lord's hand, despite Palpatine being described as being like a phantom in the Dark Empire sourcebook. When Luke set about re-establishing the Jedi Order, he was aided in combat techniques by Cam Solusar, who trained in lightsaber combat by Palpatine's dark side elite, and Corran Horn, a former member of the Corellian security force, who had training in various unarmed combat techniques. It should be noted that many of Skywalker's students and disciples were capable of standing toe-to-toe with Skywalker himself, albeit Luke never used his true power, no doubt due to their familiarity with his fighting method. While Luke had been provided with formal training in Atari by Master Yoda, passing this on to his own students, the loss of so much knowledge from the old Jedi Order due to the Imperial era, including many lightsaber combat techniques, forced Luke's new order to essentially start from scratch. Cam Solusar trained the students in the three rings of defense, while Corran Horn trained them in many of Corsair's combat techniques. The three forms of the Jedi Order were eventually created, each specializing in a different aspect of combat. The strong style focused on brute strength and offense, often at the expense of a defense. The fast style focused on speed and precision, and was essentially good for blast deflection. The medium style balanced out between the previous two, and oftentimes acted as a tutorial form, much like Shi Cho for the old Jedi Order. One of the finest students of the Academy, Kyle Katarn practiced and mastered all three, eventually attaining the rank of Jedi Battle Master, becoming such a formidable lightsaber altercationist that he was able to stand on neutral ground with Darth Caedus, and was noted to be the only Jedi alongside Luke and Mara Jade able to stand against Caedus on neutral ground, surpassing even the legendary Kip Duron on pure skill with the blade. When the seven forms of the original order were rediscovered, Katarin went on to master the Gem So style as well, to a similar but likely just inferior degree to that of Anakin Skywalker, who Dooku noted explicitly was the greatest Gem So style that the Count had ever seen, despite being a member of the Jedi Order for over 6 decades. Over the next century and a half, the various lightsaber fighting forms would experience few major changes, though many masterful duels would rise to prominence over the years. The Imperial Knight would develop combat styles unique to their organization, the aggressive Praetoria Vanille and the defensive Praetoria Ishu. However, these two combat forms were practiced in addition to classical lightsaber forms, and were designed to encourage and focus on teamwork rather than individual prowess with the blade in a setting of combat. Many of the basic moves and movements in blade work in the lightsaber were established thousands of years prior to the Clone Wars with the establishment of Shicho lightsaber form, as it was the first form developed, and this was specialized towards training in individuals in the usage of lightsaber. Attacks and parries in lightsaber combat are often described by body zones in the target, an ideal as sparring drills. Most attacks are executed with horizontal swipes, while parries are carried out with vertical blocks that are meant to push the point of the enemy's blade away, with the exception of the attack 1 and parry 1, which are reversed. Zone 1 was the head. A Zone 1 attack consisted of a vertical chop of the head, with the goal of virtually bisecting or decapitating the opponent, and the corresponding parry is a horizontal block. A classic Zone 1 attack was typically preceded by a high ground position, though the Zone 4 parry position was also used for this purpose. The Zone 1 parry position was a horizontal guard with the blade held at head height and angled across the body. It was not unheard of for a Zone 1 attack to be deflected aside by having a Zone 1 parry transition into a Zone 2/3 drop parry position. Zone 2 was the right arm and side. Zone 2 attacks were horizontal side swipes, with the corresponding counter being a vertical parry position. She chose sparring drills had their handle held at waist height, with the blade extended upwards, though their other combat forms employed drop parries with the handle held high. Assuming a humanoid duelist's right arm was as dominant, any strikes against his weapon arm would correspond with Zone 2 attacks. Zone 3, very similar to Zone 2, was the left arm and side, Zone 3 attacks are much the same as Zone 2, albeit the directions are reversed. Assuming a humanoid duelist's left arm was his dominant, any strikes against said weapon arm would correspond with Zone 3 attacks, as aforementioned. Zone 4 was the back. Zone 4 encompasses the entire midsection and torso, but refers specifically to the back. A successful Zone 4 attack is almost always fatal. Darth Maul. As the classic parry 4 position is a drop parry position with the blade angled downwards behind the duelist's back. The classic attack 4 is likely a variation on Zone 2 and 3 attacks. An alternate, albeit more awkward parry 4 position has the hilt held between the back and the waist height, with the blade extended upwards. Zones 5 and 6 refer to the right and left leg respectively. Zone 5 and 6 attacks were load slide sweeps or slashes, while the corresponding defensive positions were drop parries with the hilt held at the waist. These forms, as well as zones, were all memorized identically by all the Jedi of the Jedi Order, as it was rudimentary for all Jedi to have a practical understanding of classical combat, as well as where to aim for in classical combat if you were ever forced to engage a Sith or an opposing Force wielder, or even engage in a sparring match with your fellow Jedi. But what about the three rings of defense? As mentioned earlier when we were talking about Corran Horn and Kyle Katarn, the three rings of defense pertain to the outer ring, middle ring, and inner ring. The outer ring of defense relied on grand sweeping blows to attack at range. This was most often used by power duelists such as Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. The wide attacks took long to deliver, but they were very powerful. The outer ring consisted of 4 guard positions, all with the blade held diagonally: the upper right, upper left, and lower left. The middle ring of defense was designed to pick up quicker blows and block them, though it was also super effective for blast deflection, very similar to Sarisu. The guard positions all featured the blade being held at right angles, with the upper and lower guards being horizontal, while the left and right positions were vertical. The inner ring was the last line of defense on a Jedi Force Sensitive's resume. Dangerous to be attacking or defending for, it was proof against lunging attacks and relied on parries instead of blocks. It had only a single guard position, with the hilt covering the navy. Attacks would be deflected by angling the blade's tip and shunting them aside, very similar to Makashi, with the lower third of the blade facilitating a swift counter towards the opponent's chest or abdomen if the blade was redirected effectively. However, did you really think that this was all of the classical lightsaber combat forms? The marks of combat. All Jedi forms involve the same marks of contact, describing them as objective maneuvers to use, and the various outcomes that could arise out of a fight involving lightsabers as weapons. They help focus the Jedi's attacks and defenses on a few clearer categories, rather than diffusing awareness across an infinite number of possibilities in a duel. The Sunder Gem was the act of disarming the opponent, with the objective being usually not to physically harm them. The classic Shi Cho move, the disarming slash, was specialized towards executing the Sunder Gem. The shim was a minute wound to the opponent by the edge of the lightsaber blade. The shim could be applied anywhere on the body. It was not specific to any zone. The Cho Mai was the amputation of an opponent's weapon hand, and was executed most notably by Count Dooku on Geonosis to Anakin Skywalker. The Cho Sun was the amputation of the opponent's weapon arm, which again was technically utilized by Dooku on Geonosis. The Cho Muk was the amputation of an opponent's limb, such as a humanoid's arm or leg. The Shiyak was the act of stabbing an opponent. The Sa Cha was the decapitation of an opponent, being a side sweep in an opponent's side and neck. The Sa Cha corresponded with Zone 2 and 3 attacks. The Side Took was an act of cutting an opponent in half, bisecting them entirely, as what happened with Darth Maul and Naboo, usually separating his or her legs from the torso at the waist. But vertical bisections corresponding with Zone 1 attacks were not unheard of. Now, we get to the last primary zone of defense, as well as the last primary contact form. We get to the Mo Ki. The Mo Ki was an attack that dismembered an opponent through a circular motion and movement of the lightsaber extremely fast, aimed at the major limbs, the arms and legs. The Mo Ki, being aimed at all major limbs, lashed out at multiple body zones. Darth Vader's dismemberment of Mustafar could be considered a triple Mo Ki strike on behalf of Obi-Wan Kenobi, as it amputated both of his legs in Zone 5 and 6, and his left arm in Zone 3, leaving only his mechanical hand remaining. As befitting all Jedi, and all Sith for that matter, as well as typically all lightsaber duelists, all of them had mastered a specific ready stance, while all the lightsaber forms had their own unique opening and ready stances. A number of positions were standard to lightsaber combat in general. The Jedi ready stance had much in common with the Ataru guard, where the Jedi ready was the most common stance among Jedi. The dominant foot was held back with the blade in a vertical parry position on the dominant side. The idea being to redirect and deflect any blaster bolt or lightsaber blade that would be shunting or piercing at the opponent's dominant side. The defensive neutral was the differences between the defensive neutral and the Jedi ready were negligible. The blade was still held in a parry position on the dominant side, though the feet were evenly spaced back rather than one held back. This position was intended to provide the maximum amount of blade surface area for blast deflection, and also maximize its visual impact as a warning. The offensive neutral consisted of the feet being evenly spaced, with the blade pointed towards the enemy. The stance was intended to provide the minimum visual blade area for target tracking. An extremely notable one was the Center of Being, a stance used in lightsaber combat, and could also be used in meditation. The stance was used by members of the Old Jedi Order, with users of this stance being able to hold the lightsaber horizontally, with the lightsaber hilt just below the chin in order to avoid any form of decapitative movements. There were many moves and maneuvers in lightsaber combat as befitting the 7 classical forms, which we will get into soon. Those being the Jung, a 180-degree turn, the Jung Ma, a 360-degree spin, the Shun, a 360-degree spin, during which the lightsaber was held one-handed. The Sai, an act of overleaping an attack at the legs, as utilized by Count Dooku on Geonosis against Obi-Wan Kenobi. The flowing water cut was a technique based on the principle of using the space created when an opponent withdrew their lightsaber offensively to one's own advantage. As the opponent pulled their lightsaber back from a bind, the user would follow it with their blade, in effect causing the opponent to pull the user's blade into themselves entirely. The falling leaf cut was an ancient move that involved the user spinning and making a fast slash at an opponent standing behind them, and then return to face the way they were before the maneuver. It was described as spinning one's feet to slash from the sky. The Dulon was a lightsaber move where the hilt's pommel would be held at one's midsection with the blade 30 degrees up, and would be slashed at high velocity. The name Dulon also referred to the solo lightsaber training. The Kai Khan was not a maneuver per se, but rather a reenactment of a prior lightsaber duel. This was used often by Obi-Wan Kenobi with his duel with Darth Maul. There were various form-specific maneuvers, as each of the lightsaber combat forms were self-contained martial arts styles with different styles and regimens. They each possess moves and maneuvers unique to them specifically. We'll run through these pretty quick. Form 1 Shicho had both the disarming slash and the Sarlacc sweep. The disarming slash was a strike directed at the opponent's weapon in an attempt to rip it out of their grasp and destroy it. And the Sarlacc sweep was a wide sweeping motion in which the duelist struck against multiple enemies. Form 2 Makashi had both the contentious opportunity and the Makaku requisite, a tactic based on recognizing and exploiting an opening in the opponent's defenses before swiftly moving to strike the exposed enemy, and a defensive technique where the duelist slightly altered the angle of an opponent's attack before quickly retaliating with a counter-strike. This was most commonly used by Count Dooku. Count Dooku was a massive fan of the Makaki requisite, as he used it on Geonosis against Obi-Wan Kenobi to severely injure Kenobi after dealing a lethal cut to his arm as well as a lethal cut to his leg. Form 3 Sarisu had the Circle of Shelter and the Deflecting Slash. The Circle of Shelter was a technique where the duelist created a protected area and a cocoon around themselves and their allies, making it nigh impossible for enemies to penetrate even with halo forms of blaster fire. The deflecting sash was a technique where the duelist redirected the momentum generated by deflecting an enemy projectile into a slashing attack and an adjacent target. Form 4 Ataru, the most acrobatically demanding form in terms of physical ability and acrobatics, had two as well, the Hawk Bat Swoop, intending to allow a combatant to quickly strike at their opponent without giving them a chance to react. This was most notably utilized in the Revenge of the Sith novelization by Grandmaster Yoda when he engaged Darth Sidious, and their fight quickly moved up to the Senate podium, as well as the Saber Swarm, with Yoda being a master of the Saber Swarm. Numerous short strikes that were aimed at the adversary, not intended to kill, but simply to overwhelm and confound their opponent, which Yoda actually managed to do with Sidious, forcing the Sith to put away his lightsaber in fear of being killed by Yoda in direct combat. Form 5 to Gemso and Xien, however, had four: the Barrier of Blades, the Falling Avalanche, the Fluid Requisite, and the Xien Deflection. The Barrier of Blades defended the user from blaster fire and redirected some of the incoming blasts. The Falling Avalanche was an overhand power blow that crashed upon an opponent with incredible nigh immeasurable force. The Fluid Requisite was a smooth transition from carrying an attack to a counter-strike, and the Xien Deflection was simultaneously deflecting weapons fire and leaping towards an opponent. Form 6, Nine Man, was one of the more force-based forms into all things considered. Form 6 Nine Man had the draw closer technique, consisting of the end duelist telekinetically seizing an opponent and pulling the enemy into the path of their blade. This was often utilized by both Arkan and Exar-kun in their respective eras in direct combat, albeit Arkan's lightsaber form was primarily geared as a native fighting style of the cool. However, if he ever was to learn one of the traditional Jedi fighting disciplines, I would heavily believe it would be Nine Man. The second thing regarding Nine Man was the pushing slash. The duelist would slash an opponent before blasting the side with a forced push. Form 7, Juya and Vapad had 4 as well, an assured strike, which traded sheer power for a near certainty of landing a hit. Vonskir's ferocity, involving a ferocious attacking of the opponent. A swift flank, the user leaped or dashed around an opponent to make a quick strike, with the speed of the maneuver intended to catch opponents off guard, very similar to a turret. And tempered aggression, used to describe the ferocity of the Bavard form, but with more control against succumbing to the dark side even in the heat of battle. With regards to Sakan had the high ground defense and the unhindered charge, usually involving environment. Combatants made use of large amounts of terrain trying to maneuver their opponents into vulnerable areas during the course of battles that involved Sakan techniques, notably used by Satil Shan during the Battle of Alderaan to compensate for Darth Malgus's overwhelming physical might as well as superior blade work. The unhindered charge, however, was rapid movements towards the opponent, ignoring default terrain and obstacles, which Darth Malgus typically used, as Malgus was known to get tunnel vision during his engagements, as he did notably during the Battle of Alderaan with Satil Shan, which led him to be numb to his surroundings, ultimately allowing the clone Jace Malcolm to get the drop on him and explode a grenade right in his face. With regards to Jar Kai, this is one that many of you will know well. Jar Kai was the art of dual blade fencing, a dual-wielding strike that the character simultaneously swung both lightsabers to act as a strong form of attack. Both lightsabers met their target or object, cleaving them in two. Jar Kai had two, the Twin Strike and the Rising Whirlwind. I briefly mentioned this Twin Strike earlier, but the Rising Whirlwind was quite interesting, where a duelist swung his lightsaber about his body, creating a brilliant whirlwind of varying color and indiscernible color depending on what color the lightsaber was tinted. When it comes to the last two, these are the ones that are the most interesting to me. We have the trip set, which only consisted of one, the spinning attack. The flying duelist would hover in one spot and spin wildly, lashing out at multiple opponents. It was very difficult for a Jedi to maintain his force ability while also utilizing a lightsaber sequence in extreme proficiency, as noted by Obi-Wan Kenobi, that being the reason why Obi-Wan Kenobi did not often use the Force against General Grievous, and many Jedi did not in that matter. They had to either fight Grievous with a lightsaber, which 99% of Jedi would lose at him against due to his sheer mastery of it, or they could fight him with the Force, which was too taxing and Grievous would butcher them down to a pulp before they could even gather enough energy to create a sizable dent in Grievous's heavy armor. One notable exception to this was Mace Windu, who during the Battle of Coruscant, after engaging Grievous on a moving train, was able to crush the cyborg's lung, weakening him enough for later in Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan Kenobi to kill Grievous on Utapau after centering himself in the Force. The last typical combat method we have is Trakata. Trakata has 3, and I bet many of you have never heard of it. Trakata was the art of various different things, including pass the blade, the unbalancing block, and the flock slash. With pass the blade, the duelist deactivated his blade as he attacked, bypassing the opponent's block before igniting it into the hapless foe, cleaving them or impaling them in two. The unbalancing block was when the duelist caught the opponent's blade with his own before momentarily deactivating it, causing the opponent to stumble and leave himself open for fatal counterattacks. While the flash slash was the activation of the duelist's blade for only a moment, allowing just enough time for the blade to reach full length while being swung, and then deactivated again, an incredibly useful deceptive tactic very similar to Dun Mok rather than a notable fighting discipline. Befitting the fact that the alternate name for lightsaber combat was Jedi combat, the Jedi obviously had an extremely important and influential hand when it came to the training methods. The various lightsaber training methods were largely devised by the Order, with other organizations borrowing elements for their own use and tutelage. Most of the Jedi training elements were established by Shicho Bladework, which would continue to find a niche as a tutorial form as it was the most basic and plain of all lightsaber forms. In order to teach students to draw upon the Force rather than rely on their senses, early-level Shicho blast reflecting training was conducted with a blindfold, forcing the initiate to rely upon his instincts rather than his powers as a natural human. Later, training was conducted through the usage of sequences and velocities, the continuous repetition making the moves instinctive reflexes. These training regimens were also carried over to all following lightsaber combat forms, which used similar methods and all built upon Shicho blade work rather than improvising an entirely new style. Albeit every new style was different as it had a unique purpose among lightsaber combatants, it was largely deviating from Shicho, as Shicho was rather simple and unpredictable, while all other forms were categorized and more industrialized than Shicho. With regards to lightsaber sequences, they were precisely choreographed series of attacks and parries that flowed together smoothly and were utilized during combat against opposing force wielders. Each form of combat had its own sequences, and there were hundreds of different sequences which could be chained together and applied to various combat altercations and scenarios. Some believe that using sequences in combat was superior to using individual moves, because taking time to consider and use these moves individually in combat was slow and inefficient if you did not have a mind that worked faster than a millisecond. And using sequences instead of individualized moves was faster and more fluid and smooth, providing significant advantages over those who just use individual moves. Sparring was a mock combat between two duelists. Sparring sessions provided novices with the opportunity to test their skills against an equal or greater opponent and learn from their mistakes. Many fully trained duelists would take frequent sparring sessions with contemporaries to ensure that their skills didn't atrophy, sometimes opting for training draws in the absence of live sparring partners. While most sparring matches were relatively free form, there were certain styles of matches governed by a strict set of rules. These were more specialized matches that were intended to develop skills in specific ways, such as developing timing and consistency, and was extremely common among both Jedi and Sith Padawans who were extremely competitive with one another. Some of the most notable sparring matches occurred during the High Republic era, where Jedi Dooku, Mace Windu, and Yoda often sparred with one another, with legend even spreading around the Jedi Temple of Plo Koon utilizing its hybridized form of Xi'an into Gem So in order to successfully defeat Yoda in a sparring altercation. Albeit Yoda was definitely not going all out in this altercation and would crush Plo Koon in any other situation, beating Yoda in any facet, very similar to beating Darth Vader in Starkiller's case, was an exceptional feat, with in my personal opinion Yoda being a slightly better duelist than even Vader, and you all know how highly I rate Vader in terms of combat. The term of Delon typically referred to a lightsaber move where the duelist would hold the hilt's pommel at one's midsection with the blade 30 degrees up, and would be slashed at high velocity. However, the term also referred to a solo lightsaber training exercise in which a Padawan practiced sequences of the moves against imaginary opponents, which I definitely don't do in real life, guys. Anyway, moving on to velocities. Velocities involve two students practicing sequences of attacks and parries against one another, repeating the same patterns over and over to the point of perfection, constantly increasing the speed of said movements until one opponent got hit, or decided to yield by saying Sola. The Twin Suns technique was a form of practice where two Jedi would use the Force to rise and land like two suns crossing the sky, obviously influenced by the binary sunset of Tatooine. It required a great mastery in lightsaber combat of their chosen form, high attunement with the Force, and precise timing. The technique required two Jedi to stand at opposite ends of an open arena. Then the combatants would start running at each other and make a Force jump towards the opponent. While in the air, the Jedi would activate their lightsabers, and when crossing beside midair, they would strike at one another, trying to harmlessly cut a piece of the opponent's clothing and then deactivate the lightsaber before landing on the ground. Overall, it sounds like a really, really fun time. Lastly, we have Fallows Cadences. Fallows Cadences was a series of lightsaber training techniques developed by the famed Jedi Master Vobran Fallow. In each of Vobran Fallow's cadences, the primary practice is to stand in a circle of candles with ball bearings atop them, and attempt to strike the ball bearings without hitting the candles. As the duelist proceeds through each of the cadences, the number of candles will be incrementally increased until the fifth, where the duelist will achieve such a state of mastery that the candles are unnecessary, as the duelist will simply know where he has performed the sequence correctly, and what opponents and intricacies of the sequence he has to improve on. Attaining such a mastery of a form was nigh unheard of, and was only accomplished by the highest echelon of duelists of their respective eras. Duelists like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Count Dooku, Master Yoda, and Sidious, as well as Anakin Skywalker, were the only duelists capable of doing such a thing as of their time in the pre era. However, beings such as Darth Malgus, Darth Angral, and the Hero of Titan in the Old Republic era would also be capable of accomplishing such feats, as it was common for Jedi Masters with superb acknowledgement of lightsaber combat, and typically Jedi Guardians who wielded blue-bladed lightsabers, to be able to utilize this same technique pioneered by the Jedi Master Roren Falo. But what role did lightsaber combat have in the infamous Jedi trials, also referred to as the trials of knighthood? Jedi rituals or Jedi ceremonies were necessary mandatory challenges Jedi Padawans were given as a prerequisite for achieving knighthood, and were sometimes retaken by knights to earn the rank of Jedi Master. The trials were administered by the Jedi High Council to any Padawan they deemed worthy of becoming a Jedi. The primary trials were a set of 5, and were the trial of skill, courage, flesh, spirit, and the trial of insight. In addition, the council could assign substitute tests or use an exceptionally trying mission in place of traditional tests, as well as the test being completed on the battlefield, with Anakin Skywalker completing the trial of flesh on Geonosis after losing his arm. Like the initiate trials, these tests were required to be taken in order to proceed to the next rank in the Jedi Order. The trial I will be directing your attention to primarily here is the trial of skill, one of the oldest trials in the battery of tests preferred by the Order. While the test did consist of numerous displays of lightsaber technique and adequacy, the main thing was that the battle master looked for when judging a potential knight was their ability to avoid distraction via self-discipline and centering. Before its formalization, the trial was made up of acrobatic feats while using the force to levitate objects in the midst of storms. As the test was incorporated into the more standard academy testing, the High Council required that each participant face off against some form of adversary, though the individual or individuals they faced varied by the species or religions, and could be made of flesh and blood, or a clever simulacrum created of archived data. In some cases, Padawans were forced to compete with the Battle Master in a duel, or even the Grand Master, and outlast their attacks. Other students may face many opponents, some of them attacking with a lightsaber, others manipulating perception or altering the environment in the chamber. Additionally, the Council could opt to use a simulacrum program, and set any number of Sith Lords to test the stamina of the young Padawan in an altercation. And now, my friends, we move on to what I suspect all of you have been waiting for, a complete holistic examination and dissection of all traditional 7 lightsaber forms and various variations created by Luke Skywalker and other dark side organizations. We're going to run through these holistically, providing a holistic and in-depth examination of each one, as well as its movement, history, description, and notable practitioners and masters of the style. Starting with the original one, we are going to be starting with Form 1, noted by Kreia as being simple, with simplicity being its strength. Form 1, also known as Shi Cho, the Way of the Sarlacc, or the Determination form, was the first of the traditional 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Developed during the transitional period with the Jedi Order from ancient metal swords to more contemporary proto-sabers, Shi Cho is intended to cater these new weapons, establishing a basic motions and target zones utilized with a lightsaber. A Shicho was effectively an experimental combat form, and was created prior to the emergence of the Dark Jedi Zendor and his army, as well as the Order of the Sith Lords. It did not address the issue of lightsaber to lightsaber dueling, and was quickly replaced by Form 2 in the event of the Second Great Schism. Despite this, Shicho continued to find a niche as a training form, with almost every Jedi duelist receiving some rudimentary instruction on it upon their admission to the temple, and including elements of their own combat style from Shicho. Shicho was regarded as an effective fallback option when no other form or combat style would suit the situation, and was particularly potent against General Grievous. In combat, Form 1 lightsaber combat was wild and raw, relying on deliberate tactics and being particularly and primarily aimed towards disarming rather than injuring adversaries, and keeping with the Jedi philosophy. Basic initiatives in the style demonstrated a rather clumsy performance, though in the hands of a master, Shicho was fluid but highly randomized and unpredictable. The original lightsabers used by the Jedi Order were unstable and cumbersome weapons, merely used for ceremonial ornamentary purposes, and requiring no specialized fighting methods for such usage. However, as lightsaber technology developed and they became usable as a viable combat weapon, and combat form tailored to make usage of the advantages offered by lightsabers and compensate for their weaknesses became needed. Thus, the first form of lightsaber combat was developed for the omnidirectional of the blade. As the most ancient style of lightsaber combat created, Shicho was developed during the transition period from swords to lightsabers. Lightsabers were wielded in a manner similar to swords. So many of the maneuvers, such as attacks or parries, remained unchanged, and the key principles of old sword fighting methods continued to be incorporated. Simplicity and persistent methods of the form led to it being dubbed the Way of the Sarlacc and the Determination form throughout the millennia. As Shi-Cho was developed prior to either the emergence of the Dark Jedi or the Sith Lords, it was not created with lightsaber to lightsaber combat in mind, and was rather best well-rounded and suited for Jedi traveling throughout the galaxy spreading the Force. Despite this, it was the preferred form of such groups when they began appearing, as it was quite simply the only option available at the moment. As lightsaber duels between practitioners of the Force became increasingly common, each side desired an edge, and form was judged as being inadequate for the task of lightsaber-to-lightsaber fencing, leading to the development of the second form of lightsaber combat, also known as Makashi, which we will get to next. Despite the advancement and development of the combat form tailored to lightsaber dueling specifically, Shi-Cho was not rendered obsolete by any means. Its simplicity and basic focuses left the form ideally suited for basic training, and was used to provide initiates with an early introduction to lightsaber combat. Shi-Cho remained an effective form of combat for thousands of years after its inception, its simplicity making it a good fallback option when no other form would suit. However, a true master of the form could use it in both lightsaber combat and battlefield situations to great effect, as demonstrated by the master of the form Kit Fisto on numerous occasions. Shi-Cho is an extension of traditional sword fighting techniques. It retained the basics of attacks, parries, and body zones, established by such ancient methods. Shi-Cho fostered an emotionally heated mindset, which resulted in the considerable temptation to execute combat with lethal intent, requiring great restraint to exercise the form without going too far into the dark side, something Kit Fisto consistently battled against and butted heads with Obi-Wan Kenobi about. Despite the pull to kill, the style was designed for the purpose of disarming without seriously injuring the opponent, and not the idea to kill. Shi-Cho's swordplay was simplistic and raw. In the hands of a master, the blade work was described as like watching water flow over the falls. However, less adept practitioners displayed more basic and somewhat clumsy performance in formal combat. In a duel, Form 1 encouraged deliberate tactic, calling for continuous step-by-step advancement while cutting off an opponent's angles. Shi-Cho was specialized towards engaging multiple opponents, the wide sweeping motions being ideally suited towards attacking numerous adversaries. However, Form 1 was not as useful against single opponents as the enemies had complete mobility and could find a weakness in Shi-Cho's completely clumsy blade work, and once Makashi came along, it was rendered basically useless in lightsaber duels as Makashi was particularly geared towards lightsaber combat itself. Among the skilled warriors who utilized Shi-Cho in combat were Lucien Dre and Mitra Surik. Dre was trained by the fallen Jedi Hazen, who took over due to the neglectful behavior of Lucien's mother, Krinda. Despite Hazen's lack of power or skill naturally, he was able to mold and forge Lucien into a formidable duelist, proven when Lucien took on the four seers of Ranate, Feln, Zama, and Quinalia simultaneously in a group sparring match and beat them all. However, Dre was not invincible, as shown during his final confrontation with his former pupil, Zane Carrick, whom Dre tried to kill after failing under Hazin's influence, where the latter identified as a Sith acolyte was revealed. Despite Carrick's comparative lack of skill and self-described awkward relationship with the Force, he was able to contend with Lucien blow for blow and hold him off. However, Lucien's advanced skill was enough that Carrick could not defeat him, and Carrick only survived because he managed to conceive Lucien to back down. Some of the notable practitioners of Shi-Cho consisted of Lucien Dre himself, as it had been in existence for many millennia and was used to provide early training in lightsaber combat. Almost all lightsaber duels received a rudimentary level of training in it and included aspects of it in their form in their own fighting methods. Both Mitra Surik, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Kit Fisto were all masters of Shi-Cho, with in particular Kit Fisto taking it to the highest echelon. Shi-Cho had many advanced or specialized practitioners. In more recent years, the form was mastered by the Jedi Swordmaster Sindralig along with the other six forms. Grandmaster Yoda and Swordmaster Mace Windu also were proficient in its usage, as they are said to have fully mastered all the clinical 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Master Locker of the Almas Academy was also credited as having mastered Form 1. Kento Marek was a Shi-Cho practitioner, and his son, Galen Marek, also known as Starkiller, maintained a familiarity with the form enhanced by the training of proxy, able to recognize it in his opponent's technique. Dooku himself had sufficient knowledge in Shi-Cho that he personally trained General Grievous and his IG-100 Magna Guards in the style. Darth Vader incorporated elements of Shicho into his personal variant of Form 5, and his son Luke Skywalker received instruction in basic Form 1 velocities during his early training under Obi-Wan Kenobi. Eventually, as the eras went by and the era of the Empire was ushered in, as well as the era of the New Jedi Order following the final death of Palpatine, Shicho, like the other Sith ancient lightsaber forms, would eventually be rediscovered by Luke Skywalker's New Jedi Order and taught within the Jedi Praxium. Coming up next on the examination bench, we have Form 2, one of my personal favourite forms in all of the lore, Makashi, the Way of the Salamiri, and the Contention form was the second of the 7 classical forms of lightsaber combat, developed for the specific purpose of lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat, to address the failings of Form 1 as dark side practitioners, including the Dark Jedi Zendor and eventually the Order of the Sith Lords, began to rise up and oppose the Jedi. Makashi was the most dueling-centric of all the 7 classical forms, with the Gemso a close second, relying on precision and efficiency and economy of movement over Shicho's wild sleeping motions, making it a perfect counter to Shicho. Form 2 allowed an initiate to defend themselves against an opponent with minimal effort, while placing a heavy focus on avoiding disarmament. Makashi was best described as elegant and focused, like a dancer in the hands of a true master, and was based on balance and footwork to outmaneuver opponents rather than dominate them through sheer force. Fluidity, precision, and economy of motion were relied on rather than pure brute strength, with Form 2 blade work heavily utilizing jabs and light cuts rather than hack and slash movements. Overall, the form was at its fore when engaged in combat against a single enemy duelist, with it being weak when diluted among multiple opponents. However, after the century-long war known as the 100-Year Darkness saw the destruction of most of the galaxy's Dark Jedi, the chances of a Jedi encountering a lightsaber-wielding opponent began to decrease rapidly. In the intervening years, the Great Hyperspace War and Old Sith Wars began, and ended in quick fits and starts, which caused the appearance of Dark Jedi and the Sith to take on a sporadic pattern. This, combined with the increasing availability of blaster technology, resulted in the Jedi encountering the ever-increasing number of blaster-wielding opponents and mercenaries. As Makashi had been directly birthed and geared towards lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat, it lacked the effective means of combating enemies with projectile weapons. Due to this oversight, Makashi lost a great deal of its practical applicability within a standard combat scenario, and over time it faded into relative obscurity. It would eventually be supplanted by Form 3 Sarisu, which we will examine next, which was both the most defensive of the 7 forms and designed specifically for blast deflection in a time when the Jedi needed it most. However, during the era of the new Sith Wars, the style would see a return to prominence, as 1,000 years off on warfare which saw the rise and fall of numerous Sith organizations and subsects such as the Brotherhood of Darkness. After the Battle of Ruusan concluded these wars, the style once again faded from popular usage, and never regained any widespread practice amongst the Jedi, save for a few particular notable wielders who would become notable Force wielders and duelists of their day. Of the 7 forms, Makashi was the most akin to a bladed weapon duel, becoming and developed during an era where engagements with Darksiders and Rogue Jedi became almost a routine activity. Form 2's primary purpose was to serve as a counter to the first form, Shi-Cho, by relying on precision swordplay to counter Form 1's sweeping movements, with a heavy focus on preventing disarmament, the primary goal of Form 1. The early levels of Makashi were devised to provide a defense against an opponent's blade, allowing an initiate in the style to defend himself with minimal effort or energy spent, but needing to be paired with a more offensive style to score a winning killing blow. The higher levels of the form proved considerably more effective in standard combat. Form 2 blade work encouraged precision and efficiency over power, using jabs, parries, and light cuts rather than slashes, blocks, and various other techniques like chops. The blade was manipulated required for this form was very calculated, requiring intense focus and expert timing. Not a millimeter of movement was wasted. It was described as elegant, powerful, and precise, relying on feints to confuse and trap opponents into a mental as well as physical combat altercation. These refinements allowed use of the form to attack and defend with minimal energy expenditure, with Makashi also placing a great deal of emphasis on footwork and economy of movement in both attack and defense. The footwork of Form 2 practitioners commonly followed a single line, front and back, shifting the feet to keep in balance as the practitioner advanced and retreated. Makashi was style based on balance, on back and forth charges, thrusts, and sudden retreats. Makashi practitioners were also uncommonly adept at defending themselves from force-based attacks. These elements combined to create a form that was extraordinarily effective for lightsaber dueling against a singular opponent, but very much like the will of the dark side itself, diluted when among multiple adversaries. Form 2 emphasized fluid motion and movement in anticipation of a weapon being swung at its target, and so required very smooth motion of both the blade and the body, with practitioners often wielding the blade one-handed for greater range of motion. With a skilled practitioner, the results were absolutely fatal. In fact, masters of the form will often seem so relaxed while employing it that they appear to be dancing. Can't do good. Makashi duels also train themselves to avoid enslavement to form, as such devotion opened the practitioner to be defeated by unpredictable tactics. What Count Dooku, perhaps the greatest Makashi form of all time, dubbed the Unforeseen. However, for all its effectiveness, Form 2 was not without its weaknesses, as it was designed to combat enemy duelists rather than enemy gunmen. It provided poor blast deflection training. While this was ultimately the reason for the style's decline and eventual obsolescence, it could be overcome through skill and practice. Similarly, Makashi was the most potent when used against a single opponent. It was reduced in effectiveness when fighting groups of adversaries such as sects of Darth Jedi. However, skilled practitioners could still fare very well against multiple foes by isolating their enemies and killing them swiftly. Dooku could engage up to 3 opponents simultaneously with little difficulty, relying on his footwork to outmaneuver them and take them on one at a time. And Asajj Ventress, the Night Sister assassin who was trained in Makashi by Dooku directly, perhaps the greatest Makashi wielder of all time, compensated by wielding dual blades in combat, as she engaged both Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi numerous times throughout the Clone Wars conflict. Despite its string of dueling-centered additions making it ideally the duelist form when facing another lightsaber wielder, Makashi, as admitted by Count Dooku himself, the greatest master of the style, had one particular flaw: its inability to generate kinetic energy in its application. The focus on precision and blade control hampered an adherent's ability to generate momentum in both offensive and defensive maneuvers, making styles that were experts at generating momentum, particularly the form utilized by both Anakin Skywalker and Darth Malgus in Djem So, particularly potent against Makashi wielders. Hence why Anakin was able to so easily batter down Dooku aboard the Invisible Hand, even to the point where Dooku compared Anakin's saber strikes to be like a meteor crashing down on him. A duelist who possessed a sufficient level of physical strength could potentially overwhelm even the greatest Makashi practitioner, shunting aside strikes from the form of precision offense and simply bashing through evasive footwork-oriented defenses. This lack of physical force left Makashi practitioners vulnerable to duels using more contemporary forms, which emphasized power and brute strength. This weakness was particularly pronounced as an Achilles heel against practitioners of the Djem So variant of Form 5, as the style was based almost entirely around a fast, strength-oriented swordplay. However, this weakness could, to varying degrees, be compensated for with rigorous strength training or cybernetic augmentation. And, as demonstrated by Count Dooku during the Clone Wars, he had numerous victories against lightsaber wielders who used more offensive attacks, such as General Grievous and Anakin Skywalker, who were both cybernetically augmented in order to enhance their own physical strength. He had numerous victories against power duelists like Grievous and Anakin. Simply utilizing a strength-oriented style against a Makashi practitioner was no guarantee of victory. However, it would, in many ways, increase your hand difficulty against a true master, as proven with Anakin Skywalker against Count Dooku, where his supreme physical strength eventually proved too much for the Count. One thing I'd like to bring up when discussing Makashi is the Makashi weapon specification. Due to Form 2's emphasis on blade manipulation and articulation, as well as its many fluid one-handed movements, Makashi practitioners often wielded lightsabers that were specialized for such usage. The most prominent weapon for this purpose was the curved hilt lightsaber, very similar to the one used by Count Dooku during his tenure as both a Jedi and a Sith. These weapons were utilized because the curved hilt could fit better into the palm, granting better blade control and allowing for far greater precision and strength. In addition to this, wielders often created highly decorated weapons, and occasionally included blade guards, as shown with Count Dooku's lightsaber. The other considerably rarer type of weapon was the light foil, a specialized type of lightsaber used by the Makrosa Order. Original light foils were built to the same handles for exclusively one-handed usage, and were much better balanced than typical lightsabers, allowing for much more greater precision. However, curved lightsabers and light foils were not the only weapon that Makashi could be effectively utilized with. Qui-Gon Jinn, Shaak Ti, Kento Marek, and Darth Vader also all wielded standard lightsaber hilts, and still incorporated elements of Makashi into their attacks. And Asajj Ventress demonstrated the ability to utilize the style with the saber staff as well as utilize it with Jar High. With regards to its applications, Count Dooku described it as being finesse, artfulness, and economy. Count Dooku, aka Darth Tyrannus, was possibly the finest practitioner of Makashi in all of history, mastering the form to its highest level. He personally emphasized eidetic emotional level-headedness and tactical know-how over the rain-fueled frenzy many of his opponents and even some of his students relied on, examples including Asajj Ventress or General Grievous. He demonstrated precision and elegance in his blade work, with a pinpoint accurate and unpredictable offense reinforced by an almost effortless defense, all drilled and practiced to the point of being instinct at this point. With Qui-Gon Jinn even knowing that Dooku was so well versed in Makashi that executing the strikes of Makashi was as natural to him as breathing. He relied on feints to entrap his opponents and footwork to outmaneuver, basing himself around their balance and mobility. Dooku would use these skills to work his way around and then into his opponent's guard, deflecting and evading their attacks rather than trying to meet them head to head. His skill with the style marked him as one of the greatest swordsmasters ever produced by the Jedi Order, with it being noted that only Yoda could surpass him on neutral ground, and being regarded by Darth Plagueis as perhaps the only Jedi that could successfully defeat Darth Sidious in lightsaber combat. The form's rarity provided him with an edge against most duelists, who simply were not prepared for the finesse and precise movements of a form bred for lightsaber dueling, as many Jedi of the era were not anticipating they would have to face blade-wielding opponents like General Grievous or Ventress. The sole dedication to Makashi Dooku emphasizing to his lightsaber training managed to grant him knowledge and skill nigh unrivaled by any other force sensitive during his time, truly showcasing how the exactness and fluent efficiency of genuine Form 2 master made for an extremely formidable duelist. Dooku's practical application of the form was exemplary. His skills were only surpassed by Yoda, and only Mace Windu was credited as Dooku's equal on neutral ground. On Geonosis, he demonstrated many of these skills against Obi-Wan Kenobi. His efficient, defensive maneuvers left the Jedi's swift slashes looking exaggerated and overdone, while Kenobi struggled to catch up with the Count's precise ripostes and unpredictable feints. During their initial combat altercation, many of Kenobi's parries and blocks missed Dooku's blade completely, forcing him to retreat. Kenobi was ultimately brought down by light, though dampening cuts across his left arm and thigh, causing him to crumble to the ground, and he would have been killed had it not been for Anakin's intervention. However, despite Tyrannus' absolute eidetic perception and mastery of the sequences of Form 2, he was still prone to one of the style's weaknesses, the lack of kinetic power, only augmented by the fact that he was 83 when engaging Anakin aboard the Invisible Hand. Perhaps the most notable demonstration of the Count failing to generate momentum was during Tyrannus' fateful duel with Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, as he was simply unable to generate the necessary power to evenly match Skywalker's preferred form to Gem So, nor to penetrate the defenses of Kenobi's Form 3. The sheer, raw, undetermined power of Form 5 wore down Tyrannus' defenses and force reserves, physically exhausting him and draining his reserves of force power, while Anakin just kept getting stronger. This weakness, combined with his age and Skywalker's overwhelming skill and power, resulted in his defeat and the laceration of both of his hands. Earlier on, Tyrannus had been disarmed by Savage Opress, a towering juggernaut who had received little lightsaber training, purely due to Savage's overwhelming physical strength as a member of the Night Brother clan. Another Form 2 practitioner active at the time was the Night Sister assassin Asajj Ventress, Tyrannus' prized pupil. Developing her skills under Tyrannus' tutelage, her eventual prowess as a duelist enabled her to hold her own against up to 3 adversaries with little difficulty, demonstrated during her mission to rule. Her skills were even advanced enough to a point where she was able to defeat Kit Fisto in formal combat, and disarm Obi-Wan Kenobi, and hold her own against a holding back Mace Windu, all 3 of whom were Jedi Council members. Even got to the point where in the Clone Wars show, she was nearly able to kill Jedi Master Luminara and Dulu, with Ahsoka even noting that Luminara was not able to stop Ventress single-handedly. However, Ventress was no master, and while she demonstrated both elegant blade work and sophisticated footwork, her form lacked refinement as Dooku's did. Rather than practice emotional level-headedness as Dooku had, she often grew impatient and impassioned and fought with animalistic rage. While this angry onslaught enabled her to engage and even defeat some of the best Jedi duelists of her day, Darth Sidious believed it could also compromise her tactical planning abilities in the midst of combat, very similar to Darth Malgus' tunnel vision, which we will get to when we analyze Form 5. During her earlier years, she lacked the physical strength necessary to compensate for the inherent weaknesses of both Makashi and dual-bladed combat. Her attacks lacked power, as shown by Dooku's casual defensive movements during their bout on Ratak, and a retreat before Anakin Skywalker's frenzy of power attacks during the duel on Yavin 4. However, she eventually developed the necessary strength to compensate for this weakness, demonstrating the innate ability to hold up simultaneous blade locks with multiple duels at a time. She could even manage to hold off the strikes of the physically superior opponents such as General Grievous or Savage Press, if only temporarily. Ventress was initially heavily reliant on her extra blade, and was left at a disadvantage if deprived of both of her weapons, although she eventually overcame this with time, and became as proficient as utilizing one blade, as she did in the art of Jarkai dual blade fencing, although she did hold some preference for Jarkai, as it was the way in which she had been trained to further hone her skills more than she had in a single blade. With regards to its practitioners, Form 2's primary niche was among Jedi duelists who engaged Darksiders, or conversely, Darksiders who engaged Jedi. Examples of such combatants include the Jedi Kreia, who taught the Jedi Exile the basics of the form, Rance Lusk as the top student of the Sith Academy on Ordos Fastun, or the Sith apprentice Folgara, who was trained by the Sith Blade Master Kasim in the era of the Brotherhood of Darkness. However, following the final Battle of Ruusan and the subsequent Ruusan reformation and speculated extermination of the Sith, Makashi was left obsolete. The dueling-centric form lacked proper blast-deflective techniques that made it a practical fighting method against criminals and bounty hunters, and the number of active lightsaber-wielding Darksiders to engage in was practically nil. Nevertheless, Form 2 was still taught among the Jedi, with proponents such as Scar Vark praising the mental discipline it instilled. As a matter of fact, the Jedi often, in various events such as the Jedi held mid-year feat, featured classical Makashi duels between the various participating sword masters of the time, ensuring the style's continued survival as well as usage. Furthermore, the attitude towards the style's obsolescence was disputed by notables such as Obi-Wan Kenobi, who argued that the idea that there were no enemy lightsaber duels to combat was mere wishful thinking, believing that the Sith were in hiding due to the growing presence of the dark side in the galaxy even prior to the outbreak of the Clone Wars. Despite this, by the time the Clone Wars broke out, few practiced the form, with the most notable being Count Dooku. Like Scratch Vonk, Dooku argued Makashi's continuing relevance was due to the discipline it instilled, and it was held high among the highest of fighting forms. Other Jedi practitioners of Makashi included Dooku's former Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn, although his main form was Ataru, the famed Jedi Battle Master Sin Dralin, Jedi Master Shaka T, and Inquisitor Jarek, who is said to have mastered the form, however not to the echelon that Dooku did. Grandmaster Yoda appeared to also have some adequacy in the form, as he had once taught Dooku the Makashi Salute, as well as having mastered all 7 lightsaber forms himself. As Darth Tyrannus, Dooku trained both Asajj Ventress and Grievous in Form 2. Makashi evidently became one of Grievous's primary fighting methods, as many of his opponents commented on Dooku's influence in his technique, and he passed his training onto his personal bodyguards, the IG-100 Magna Guards, otherwise known as the Jedi Killers, which I have a full video on. During the First Great Jedi Purge, the Sith Lord Darth Vader studied and mastered Form 2, learning one final lesson from his greatest teacher in Dooku over the course of the Clone Wars, and he often incorporated many elements of Makashi into his personalized Gemso hybridized style, taking advantage of his cybernetically augmented strength to overcome Makashi's prime weakness, that being its inability to generate momentum, making Vader, perhaps alongside Dooku, the purest and greatest Makashi wielder of all time. His proficiency even proved great enough in having to develop an unorthodox form of Makashi, in which he would rely on great precision and economy of motion and movement. His study of the form granting him and wielding it one-handed, but also retaining great power, a method that he applied effectively against Oli Starstone and his own son Luke Skywalker, swiftly besting the former and briefly overwhelming Luke. The Jedi Knight Kento Marek, the father of Galen Marek, also known as Starkiller, also incorporated elements of Makashi into its own blade work, though his understanding of the style was limited in comparison to Dooku. Vader's apprentice, the Sith Starkiller, was well versed enough in Form 2 to recognize it in Vader's technique during the altercation, and the Jedi Knight Jax Pavan also received Form 2 combat training at some point, applying simplistic Makashi movements and tactics against the bounty hunter Aurra Sing in combat. Makashi, however, like the other 6 forms, would eventually be rediscovered by the New Jedi Order, and taught as a practical form by the New Jedi Order under Luke Skywalker. Ceresa utilized tight blade work. Not one singular millimeter of space was wasted, with the lightsaber moving at every possible second in an attempt to achieve a near-total cocoon of protection, and in some cases, an invulnerable swirling blade that completely cocooned one for halos of blaster fire. and expend as little energy as possible in the process. Form 3 stress quick reflexes and fast positional transition in order to overcome the rapidity in which a blast could be fired. This technique minimized body exposure, making a well-trained practitioner practically invulnerable, which allows Sarisu to be effective against both single enemies and multiple opponents, as well as both with blasters and lightsabers, especially in the case of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Form 3 involved preparation for prolonged battles where the user observed and learned as much as possible about their adversary's techniques while engaged in combat. Also, being more optimized for lengthy battles, a Sarisu user had the ability to garner control of a combat situation, creating multiple lanes and alleys for the Jedi employing the form. A Form 3 user could choose to kill, disarm, or even reason with their opponent in the midst of combat due to the fact that they were basically invulnerable. Even someone like Anakin Skywalker was unable to conquer Obi-Wan Kenobi's masterful usage of Sarisu. And although Obi-Wan Kenobi did not employ the technique psychologically in order to try to turn Anakin back to the light side, he may very well have been able to if he had truly tried. The core tenets of Sarisu encourage viewers to place themselves within the eye of the storm, to maintain a calm center, undistracted and undisturbed by the conflict without them. In keeping with this idea, Sarisu incorporated powerful defensive techniques that were flexible enough to adapt almost any circumstance, at the cost of never reaching past the figurative eye of the storm. In other words, Sarisu was focused almost entirely on self-defense, often at the expense of offensive capabilities. The tactics encouraged by the style often involved resilience on pure defense, while essentially waiting out the opponent, holding back until his frustration or fatigue inevitably caused his defense to lapse, and then employing an alternate, more aggressive attack to take advantage of this, crippling the enemy. Overall, the whole point of Sarisu was to deflect blaster fire out of harm's way and safely prolong a lightsaber engagement in hopes of wearing an opponent down long enough to land a killing blow. Truly focused masters of the style were extremely formidable due to their strong defensive technique, as well as the well-rounded nature of the form itself, effective against both blasters and lightsabers alike. However, Form 3 facilitated survival rather than outright conquest, as Sarisu possessed no dedicated defensive sequences of its own and relied entirely on its opponent in order to execute such movements. Form 3 initiates were more than capable of defending themselves from attack, but they needed considerable experience to effectively counterattack and entrap opponents in a duel. Masters had to maintain an incredibly strong focus on the center of the combat circle, since the defensive tactics of the form included guards and parries that engaged very close on the body. Jedi with small lapses in their otherwise strong defense left little room to avoid injury. As a result of this defensive mindset, Sarisu practitioners often had great difficulty seizing their offensive initiative in combat. Similarly, the goal of many Sarisu practitioners was to prolong the fight, the idea being to cause the enemy to become fatigued or frustrated when they attempted to keep up their overwhelming offense, something that would become extremely potent against Sith Lords, as many Sith often utilize their blade work in offensive overpowering methods. However, this tactic ran the risk of fatiguing the user if said user faced an adversary who could call on their force reserves to maintain an aggressive but controlled offense consistently. With regards to its applications, Darth Xana and Darth Bane had this to say about Sarisu. Defense will not slay my enemy. You lack physical strength required for powerful attacking strikes of the Gem So, or the aggressive forms. You must rely on quickness, cunning, and most of all, patience to best your enemies. When Darth Bane first began training his young apprentice Xana, he pragmatically judged that her small stature, being much smaller than the average human, as well as light build, removed the more aggressive lightsaber forms from her potential repertoire. Teaching her to wield a saber staff, he trained her to redirect an opponent's attacks rather than directly blocking them in order to maintain her own energy. She took to twirling her weapon in order to maintain momentum, and set up a defensive shield against enemy attacks, both in the form of lightsabers and blasters. In combat, Xana was extremely devastating, relying just as much on tactical know-how as lightsaber skills. As evidenced during the engagement on Tython, with Xana seeking out strategically advantageous positions on the field, making do able to a simple room corner, using two walls to cover her flanks. Similarly, she was skilled at playing her opponents against one another, allowing lesser combatants to continue fighting in order to inadvertently hinder their fighting partners, as when she played Johan Othone against Sabre Jacques. However, Xana was not without her weaknesses. Her defense was designed to counter all-out assaults and methods devised by her opponents, a method that was devised by her experience sparring with Lord Bane. Sabre Jar's powerful attacks were tempered by caution, as Xana was forced to expend huge amounts of energy to fend him off without finding any openings for her to exploit. and she only succeeded in killing her opponent because he was momentarily distracted, allowing her to slip through his overwhelming offense. Obi-Wan Kenobi originally specialized in Form 4 Ataru, which we will get to next, trained in the form by Qui-Gon Jinn, who in turn was trained by Count Dooku. However, upon witnessing his master's death due to Ataru's lack of defensive capability, Kenobi flipped this on his head, deciding to switch his focus to Cerisi in order to eliminate the weakness in his own technique. Kenobi's resulting skill of Form 3 stood him in good stand against masterful gunslingers such as Jango Fett, a bounty hunter who had murdered Jedi with his bare hands, or during the chaotic firefight on the first Battle of Geonosis. His tight defense and energy-efficient moves enabled him to pull through and survive when most Jedi strike teams could not. However, when engaging Count Dooku on Geonosis, Kenobi's skill in Cerisi was insufficient to effectively counter Dooku's mastery of Form 2 Marker Shield. Though Kenobi was a skilled Cerisi practitioner, he wasn't a master, not yet, and he was unable as such to match Dooku's precision and economy of motion. During their duel, many of Kenobi's cutting parries outright missed Dooku's blade, forcing Kenobi into numerous scramble situations and rapidly fatiguing him due to physical exertion. Kenobi was ultimately brought down by light, incapacitating cuts across his left arm and leg, ultimately leading to him falling to the ground, where he would have been killed if it had not been for the intervention of Anakin Skywalker. Due to its notoriety among Jedi Order as the ideal Jedi fighting form, the road was long to master Form 3, but a true master of Form 3, as noted by Luminara Unduli, was invincible. Developed to combat blasters, Form 3 existed for thousands of years prior to the outbreak of the Clone Wars. One of the early practitioners of the form was Mitra Surik, the Jedi Exile, who defeated and killed Darth Nihilus, Darth Sion, and Kreia. Her tutor during her rehabilitation was Kreia, who also knew the aspects of Cerisi, but unlikely practiced it herself. By the time of the New Sith War, the Blade Master Kasim had mastered Form 3 as well as the other 6 clinical forms. Kasim trained several apprentices in the style, including Folgara, who used it against Darth Bane's Form 5. Bane himself possessed immeasurable skill in the form, training his apprentice Darth Zana in it, with Bane arguably being more proficient in the form than Zana ever was. Zana was reluctant to try the form due to the style's association with the Jedi, but Bane believed that his apprentice lacked the physical strength and body mass to effectively utilize the other forms, such as the hyper-aggressive and attack variation of Djem So, that Bane typically preferred due to the fact that Bane was an overwhelming physical powerhouse. Almost a millennium later, Cerisi was mastered by the Jedi Battle Master of the prequel era, Sin Dralik, who in turn trained many in its use. Grandmaster Yoda was also a master of its usage, as he was said to have achieved full mastery over every single conceivable form of lightsaber combat and their techniques and stances to a point of identicism. It can be assumed that he used his skill in Cerisi to defend himself against blaster-wielding opponents, as Ataru was weak against such adversaries. Swordmaster Mace Windu was also a master of Cerisi, as he, like Yoda, had fully mastered all forms of lightsaber combat, even though he never displayed his usage of it due to his mastery of a part. In fact, towards the end of the Clone Wars, Cerisi was the most common lightsaber form in the Jedi Order, with notables such as Luminara Unduli and Barriss Offee studying it. This is likely due to the fact that battle droids were 99 times out of 100, utilizing blasters, and the Separatists and Confederacy outpouring hundreds to hundreds of millions of these battle droids every single year of the Clone Wars conflict, caused them to become extremely common, necessitating the Jedi in order to become blaster-wielding adepts. Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi was also proficient in Cerisi, as was Council Member Coleman Trevor, whose focus on the purely defensive form ironically proved to be his undoing when pitted against the gunslinging skills of Jango Fett, the Mandalorian bounty hunter who would meet his end at the hand of Mace Windu the same battle he killed Coleman Trevor in. Dooku maintained an impressive knowledge of Cerisi, sufficient enough to train General Grievous and his IG-100 Magna Guards in it, and as well as analyze Obi-Wan Kenobi switching to Cerisi. During this period, one of the highest masters of Cerisi, and arguably the highest in all of Star Wars lore, was Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, who utilized this form in such a way he was able to defeat and mutilate Darth Vader, albeit Darth Vader was extremely conflicted and extremely not wanting to fight, and between both camps, light and dark, just coming to terms with all of the extermination of the Jedi and all the chaos he had brought, and not really knowing whether or what he wanted to do, being in complete emotional turmoil. Following his cybernetic reconstruction, however, Vader intensely studied Form 3 and incorporated elements of its defensive blade work into his personal variation of Form 5, creating a hybridized style, which he would later incorporate elements of Ataru, Makashi, and Juya into its blade work. Although at first his skills were only just enough to defend from what would be fatal attacks when he was still applying the clumsy method he used, while not having adjusted to the armor. By the time of his adjustment to the armor fully, Vader's study of Surizu had granted him advanced enough knowledge and ability that he even managed to create an unorthodox personalized application of the form that he applied effectively in protecting the weak spots of his suit, particularly his respirator, fighting with two-handed grips, elbows pressed slightly to his sides, with the blade deftly held straight out in front of him. Manipulating it deftly with his wrists only made Vader nigh indomitable, and a combative application of this form was enough that he was able to, albeit with great difficulty, defeat the reborn amplified clone of Darth Maul, as well as old Ben Kenobi, albeit these would be mere emissaries in comparison to his most famous kills. Eventually, Vader was able to extend the usage of Surisu fully to his whole body, and had become proficient enough to even leave no openings behind while also attacking with great ferocity, allowing him to overwhelm even Kenobi, the so-called Master of Surisu, by ferociously attacking while also adequately defending enough to not leave a single opening for his master to exploit. During his duel with Starkiller, Vader, having learned his lesson of underestimating Merrick, utilized his skill in Surisu to maintain an effective defensive, also retaining immense offensive formidability only enhanced by cybernetics, allowing him to eventually bring down the clone. Vader's apprentice, Galen Merrick, was also familiar and highly skilled with Surisu, and used it on numerous occasions against highly aggressive opponents, allowing him to tire them out by repeatedly blocking their blows skillfully while maintaining enough stamina to overwhelm the exhausted opponent. Merrick's lightsaber training holodroid, Proxy, replicated Surisu with his Obi-Wan Kenobi combat module, doing so with such accuracy that Merrick used it as reference when he studied the form. And eventually, when Obi-Wan Kenobi finally came out of hiding, he would briefly tutor Luke Skywalker in the form, with Luke Skywalker developing some skill with Form 3, using it to deflect various blaster fire. Now, my friend, we get to what is perhaps my favorite form out of them all seven. Form 4, Ataru, otherwise known as the Way of the Hawkbat, or the Aggression form, or the form utilized by one Grand Master Yoda, was the fourth of the seven forms of lightsaber combat. The history of Ataru stretched back through the Old Republic era to at least as early as the Mandalorian Wars, where it was commonly employed by Jedi of that day against the ferocious and combat-oriented Mandalorians. Ataru continued to be a common form among the Jedi in the later stages of the Republic. It was also known to be employed by the Sith due to its ferocious nature. An aggressive style, Form 4 was fast-paced and effective against single opponents, though weaker in prolonged combat and confined spaces due to its energy-spending nature. Also, it was not recommended for usage against opponents wielding blasters, unless a true Form 4 master could overcome this weakness, like the aforementioned Master Yoda. Ataru was characterized by force-assisted acrobatics, such as somersaults and leaping strikes, both for attack and defense. Another characteristic of the form was its fast strikes from multiple directions. Notable users of this combat form during the Old Republic included Yoda, Qui-Gon Jinn, with the New Jedi Order preserving the knowledge of Ataru, and Jedi Masters such as Luke Skywalker, Mara Jade, and Kyle Katarn, all employing it to various degrees of success. Sindralig noted Ataru to be the most acrobatic form, filled with numerous elaborate movements, and relying heavily upon a Jedi's ability to run, jump, and spin using the Force. Ataru was arguably the most aggressive combat form, relying on a combination of speed and agility. Due to this, it was also known as the Way of the Hawkbat, or the Aggression form. Practitioners of Ataru were always on the offensive, attacking with wide and fast sweeping motions and swings. Form 4 practitioners constantly called upon the Force to augment and enhance in their movements and attacks. By allowing the Force to flow throughout their body, they would overcome the physical limitations, including fatigue and old age, as was the case with one of the greatest duelists of all eras, Master Yoda, who could perform amazing feats of acrobatics, such as somersaults and backflips effortlessly, not only for attack, but also to evade the slashes and strikes of their opponents. Jedi utilizing Ataru needed to incorporate all the Force powers that involve surpassing the normal physics at full ranges of motion, speed, and agility in order to be successful. Running, jumping, and spinning were all emphasized by leaning in the elaborate kinetics of the form. Those who utilized Form 4 could move at extremely light speeds and could rain strong blows, jumping and attacking through the air. Powerful and quick spinning attacks that could be utilized from all angles, either from the ground or the air. Masters of Atara could appear like a blur to their opponents, even other trained Force wielders such as Darth Maul or Count Dooku. And even Darth Sidious, noting the Grandmaster Yoda, upon letting the full power of the light flow through him, was a blur to the Dark Lord, with Yoda being perceived by Sidious as attacking from all directions, the fronts, the sides, overhead, or behind, with the Force not only allowing Yoda to perform athletic feats otherwise impossible, but also help to guide their actions and movements in combat. Ataru proved to be an efficient combat form when used properly, and was extremely common among the Jedi during the Mandalorian Wars as ushered in by Revan and Malak. It was well suited to close combat, particularly against singular opponents, due to its speed and agility. Atara was recommended for use by the Jedi with the ability to enhance their speed and stamina with the Force, and Jedi that had a particular penchant for Force augmentation and enhancement. Because it was such an aggressive and ferocious style, Atara was generally not optimal for usage against multiple opponents, and was somewhat ineffective against blaster fire, particularly from multiple foes, and could only be circumvented by the highest echelon of masters. Despite these weaknesses, Jedi Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn were able to employ the form with great success during the Battle of Naboo, against a numerous amount of B-1 series battle droids. The form was not only considered not as effective for prolonged combat, as the nature of Atara could greatly tax the body. Atara practitioners were advised to withdraw if they were unable to win a devastating burst of Atara attacks. Fatigue was theorized to have been a contributing factor in Qui-Gon Jinn's defeat on Naboo at the hands of Sith Lord Darth Maul, which would be corroborated by several censuses and proven in various author statements. As during the latter stages of the Battle of Naboo, we see Qui-Gon not performing as many offensive counters, and seeming to get more tired rather than having more energy as he did at the start of the duel. In fact, ever since their brief gambit on Tatooine, Maul knew that Atara would be the Jedi Master's undoing, hence why he decided to draw out the engagement. Another contributing factor in Jinn's death was the requirement for open space for the kinetic acrobatics of Ataru. Without ample space to move in the Theed Royal Palace reactor core, Jinn was deprived of the key element in his defense, and thus could only attempt to block Maul's incessant barrage of Form 7 Jugo strikes, which we will get to later, as it is my opinion Darth Maul is one of the greatest duelists of all time. This event influenced Kenobi, and after his master's death, he changed his preferred form from Form 4 Ataru to Form 3 Sarisu, the most defensive of all forms, quite literally flipping his blaster fire as well as blast deflection techniques on their head. Through the Force, Yoda was considered to be the greatest Form 4 master in all of history, mastering the most simplistic techniques of Form 4 to their highest possible level, using it in almost all of his battles and his mastery of the style, causing others to describe him as virtually unstoppable against nearly all opponents, including separatist battle droids. Despite his diminutive stature and advanced age, his moves in his duel against Count Dooku on Geonosis were revealed as a close examination to be a fast-paced demonstration of the standard opponents of Form 4. Each action flowed from one to the other in smooth transitions characteristic of Form 4. In addition, three kinds of rotation, called Su Ma, figured prominently in his style: Jung Su Ma, spinning; Ton Su Ma, somersaults; and En Su Ma, cartwheels. All were incorporated into Yoda's style numerous times in both his duels with Dooku across the Clone Wars and his duel with Darth Sidious. These three movements represented the three possible axes of rotation in a three-dimensional space. Together, paired with force-enhanced dumps, the rotational Su Ma moves composed most of his style, making the Grand Master exemplary of Form 4 mastery. At one point prior to the Clone Wars, Yoda was known to give demonstrations of the form in usage, some of which were recorded in the data books of the Jedi Temple. Yoda also employed Atara against the clone troopers on Kashyyyk and Coruscant at the conclusion of the Clone Wars, when the Jedi Purge had first begun. Despite its weaknesses to blaster fire and multiple opponents, Yoda's mastery of the form was such that he was able to defeat the clones quite swiftly, to even greater effectiveness and speed than Obi-Wan Kenobi could, despite Obi-Wan Kenobi's form being idealistically forged for blast deflection. Dooku stated that he understood every weakness of the Ataru form, with its ridiculous acrobatics, given his many sparring sessions with Qui-Gon Jinn. Dooku's Form 2 countered Ataru by launching a series of thrusts towards the enemy's legs to draw the opponent into flipping an overhead leap, so that Dooku could burn through the enemy's spine from the kidneys to shoulder blades with his Makashi attack. The Count applied this tactic against Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was able to, however, block Dooku's blows with Cereso on board the Separatist flagship Invisible Hand during the Battle of Coruscant. And despite Dooku's immense Makashi mastery, he was unable to apply this against Yoda during the Battle of Geonosis, despite Yoda's immense usage of acrobatics leaving him vulnerable from the back when he was jumping around. Noted by Luke Skywalker as an extremely aggressive form of combat but focused, the opening stance for Atari was a balanced two-handed guard, holding the lightsaber vertically with both palms either on the right or left side of the body. One technique employed with greater effect by Atari users was known as the Hawk Bat Swoop, the same technique utilized by Yoda at the start of his duel with Darth Sidious in the Senate chambers. When utilized by Atari practitioners, it was intended to allow a combatant to quickly strike their opponent without giving them a chance to react, and then escape before they had a chance to retaliate. Another move that Atari users could use effectively was dubbed the Saber Swarm, when numerous short strikes were aimed at the adversary to force a defensive posture, forcing them on the defense while the Atari user would continue exerting physical energy in offense. Atari wielders were able to execute this combination with particular skill, especially in the case of Yoda, with both the Hawk Bat Swoop and the Saber Swarm being related to the falling leaf technique we discussed earlier, and both of these techniques gained in population during the thousand-year conflict known as the New Sith Wars. Besides the two most notable users of this form in the prequel era, Yoda and Qui-Gon Jinn, other notable practitioners of Atari were the Jedi Master Tot Donita, Zez Kaiel, Kavar, Vrook Lamar, Kiadi Mundi, Kekel Droma, Ayla Secura, Shak T, Vandato Care, and Quinlan Voss, Jedi Battle Masters Scarch Vonk and Sindralu, Sith Lord Maul, Blade Master Kasim, and the Dark Jedi Set Path, among many, many more, with some of Revan's Jedi Crusaders also practicing Atari to immense degrees. The Sith Lord Scourge, who would eventually become the first Emperor's Wrath and gain a portion of Emperor Vitiate's immortality, utilized Atari to defeat two poorly trained Sith acolytes of Darth Zedrits on Prothsidia. General Grievous and his IG-100 Magna Guards also learned Atari from Darth Tyrannus, who would identically memorize the form due to Qui-Gon Jinn and his master Yoda utilizing it to great effect. Obi-Wan Kenobi had also mastered Atari from his training under Qui-Gon Jinn, but after the death of his master on Naboo, Kenobi shifted to primarily studying Ceresu, although he would incorporate Atari blade work when he desired to take on a more offensive duel, intent on creating a hybrid between it and Atari to compensate for Atari's lack of defense. Although Ceresu would eventually become Kenobi's primary focus, he remained accomplished in Atari, and during the Clone Wars would often implement elements of Atari, primarily as acrobatics, into his swordplay. When dueling Count Dooku on the Invisible Hand in the Battle of Coruscant, Kenobi began the duel using Atari's stances and techniques to mislead Tyrannus into believing he was still an Atari specialist, before overpowering him with a Ceresu blade work, enabling Dooku to be lured into a false sense of security. As a Padawan, Anakin Skywalker briefly studied Atari, as it fit his flashy, bold, and aggressive personality. He would later use those same traits to become a true master of Form 5 to Gem So, which we will get to soon. Anakin applied the two lightsaber variant of Atari against Darth Tyrannus of Geonosis during the Battle of Geonosis, because neither Atari nor dual wielding was Skywalker's most effective style. Tyrannus broke through it easily, forcing the young Padawan to switch back to his standard Form 5. During the Clone Wars, despite his mastery of the Gemso, Anakin would prove to have advanced in Atari training, displaying proficiency in applying Atari acrobatic motions and maneuvers, which he would often incorporate into his Gemso lightsaber strikes, and would also train Ahsoka Tano in the form, to compensate for her small stature and diminutive build. After his transformation and defeat on Mustafar, Vader included elements of Form 4 into his personalized hybridized variation of Form 5, such as during his second duel with Jedi Master Roan Shrine. While at first the compass and weight of his armor made it considerably difficult for him to employ Atari acrobatics, as he regained some of his old agility through extensive training, he regained full capability in applying such maneuvers, although he only applied it when pushed. He would train his secret apprentice, Galen Merrick, in Atari as well, resulting in Merrick's familiarity with Atari and Merrick's personal training droid Proxy attempting to emulate the form with a combat module based on the capabilities of Qui-Gon Jinn, which Vader had studied personally when he was a child. Though while its aggression and agility was incredible, without the aid of the Force, which his apprentice found to be a notable weakness, Merrick didn't have much difficulty overcoming it, though he was impressed with Proxy's competent usage of Atari anyway. The usage by the apprentice was displayed both single and saber dual variants, with Atari being quite malleable to any form of Jar Kai or other single-bladed fencing that the opponent or user desired. Around 1000 BBY, Jedi Padawans were discouraged from practicing the offensive Ataru style, as their useful energy was considered prone to sloppy execution of its cadences and stances. However, by the waning years of the prequel Republic, Padawans would spend a year or two studying each lightsaber form from Form 2 to 5, including the lightsaber Ataru. The Weequay Jedi Sora Bulk, as well as the Lannic Jedi Master Evan Peel, had also mastered Ataru, in addition to other saber forms. Peel's apprentice Zach Pavan would also learn Ataru, along with other forms like his master, during his Jedi training. The Nautolan Jedi Master Kit Fisto was another competent user of Form 4. However, he often incorporated acrobatics into his Form 1 sequences, as Kit Fisto was primarily a master of Form 1 Shi Cho, which we explained earlier. The new Jedi Order, as heralded by Luke Skywalker, would learn of this form like the others, from knowledge gleaned in the Book of the Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force, holocrons, and recordings, particularly the legendary Great Holocron, which included a recording by Sindralik explaining lightsaber forms in immense detail. Kyle Katarn and the Jedi Knight Alima Ra, among others, were trained in the usage of the Force form of lightsaber combat. Grandmaster Luke Skywalker also had knowledge and skill in the usage of Ataru, albeit not as much as Jem So, very similar to his wife Mara Jade Skywalker. Skywalker learned the form both from Yoda and Obi-Wan, and passed it on to his students, teaching them to embrace it not as a weapon at first, and to use both their weapon and body when practicing the form due to its aggressive nature. Now, we move on to what is arguably the most famous lightsaber form, primarily due to its association with the main character of Star Wars himself, one Anakin Skywalker, Form 5. Dissected into two different variations being Jem So and Shien. It was also known as the Way of the Great Dragon, or the Perseverance form, was the fifth of the 7 forms recognized as canon by the Last Jedi Council for lightsaber combat. It was developed by practitioners of Form 3 Sarisu, conveniently the all-defensive form, who felt that the defensive-minded form unnecessarily extended time spent in combat by forcing its users to wait for an opportunity to strike rather than creating their own openings. Form 5 combat was characterized by power attacks, and defense immediately followed by a counter-strike. In many ways, to sum it up briefly, Jem So was characterized by having the best defense is a good offense, something Anakin Skywalker would take to heart very well during the Clone Wars, allowing him to become one of the greatest duelists in all of history, triumphing over Count Dooku and matching his own master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Shien, considered the classical variant of Form 5, was more adept at blocking blaster bolts than for blade-to-blade combat, and was most commonly used by Plo Koon, whereas the Jem So was developed later and specifically intended for usage in lightsaber combat, to hack and batter against an opponent's defenses. Both Shien and Jem So were designed to use an opponent's attack against them, as evidenced by Shien's focus on returning blaster bolts to their origin, and Jem So's emphasis on immediate counterattacks. Although some Jedi felt that Form 5 encouraged aggression, domination, as well as dark side tendencies, something that would eventually be proved aboard the Invisible Hand in the Battle of Coruscant. That sentiment did not stop many Jedi from practicing the form intensely. Form 5 was developed sometime after Form 4 Ataru, sometime prior to the Great Sith War, which was ushered in by Exar Kun, beginning in 3996 BBY, and it continued to be used for millennia. During the Jedi Civil War, New Sith Wars, Clone Wars, and far beyond, even into Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order. Like the other lightsaber forms, it saw immense use among both the Sith and the Jedi, with the Sith particularly taking a liking to this one. Knowledge of the form survived the Great Jedi Purge initiated in 19 BBY, and into the era of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Praxian. Practitioners of Form 5 included Jedi Masters Ayla Secura, Adi Gallia, Plo Koon, and Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knights Anakin Skywalker, Ulic Qel-Droma, and the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Bane. Form 5, as described by Sindralig to question any discipline with lethal potential, also known as the Way of the Great Dragon, was created by the Form 3 Sarisu Masters who desired a more offensive style in ritualistic combat, since the defensive nature of Form 3 often led to prolonged combat engagements, which they believed conflicted with the Jedi ideology, and was extremely potentially dangerous for its practitioners. Form 5 evolved into an accepted style by combining the defensive maneuvers of Form 3 with the more aggressive philosophy and tactics of Form 2 Makashi. Form 5 required a higher level of physical strength than the other lightsaber forms, making it particularly useful for Sith warriors in the Old Republic era, and particularly my personal favourite Sith of all time, Darth Malgus. The Jem So was perfect for Malgus, due to its focus on complete domination of its practitioner's opponents, and this, paired with Malgus's brutish nature, immense physical strength, and absolute lust for combat against Jedi, made Malgus in many ways the physical embodiment of the Gem So. It was considered the most physically demanding of all the forms, befitting Malgus's power strikes, even above Ataru. With Ataru, you just had to be fast and swift. With the Gem So, you had to be fast and exert immense physical strength, making it perfect for power duels like Malgus and Anakin. The form was developed around the same time as Ataru, at a time the Jedi were increasingly called upon to actively keep the peace in the galaxy. Some Jedi, noting its dedication to domination and strength, felt that Form 5 encouraged an inappropriate focus on controlling one's assailants. Other Jedi, including the Jedi Battlemaster Sindralik, were somewhat ambivalent regarding the form. Nevertheless, the form's proponents maintained that Form 5 was an effective and powerful tool for the Jedi Order, with Form 5 having two distinct variations, Shien and Degem So, with many users having a preference for one or the other rather than both. With regards to Shien, the Jedi of the Old Republic who developed and employed the classical Form 5 variant Shien dubbed it the Perseverance form. Shien was described as being a well-adapted guard against blaster fire, second only to Surisu in that regard, and enemy strikes without compromising one's ability to launch powerful counterattacks. The style worked best when countering attacks from multiple opponents simultaneously, and was typically less effective against a single adversary. Shen existed at least as early as the Jedi Civil War, which began in 3959 BBY. With its focus on repelling blaster fire, Shen kept in mind that the Jedi were often outnumbered by mercenaries and their opponents, and needed to defend themselves while retaining offensive capability, making Shen basically the perfect style for Jedi who did not want to lean too much into the dark side, but also wanted to maintain offensive viability. Additionally, there was a Sith variation of the form called Sith Shien, though it is not specified how this form might have differed from its Jedi counterpart, alongside it not being specified who created it and many other obscure details about the form. The Shien opening stands with a high guard position, with the lightsaber held in a two-handed grip above the user's head, with the blade angled upward behind the user. The dominant leg was held back, enabling powerful step-through strikes to be utilized. Shien users were also proficient in a maneuver known as the Barrier of Blade, which we discussed earlier, which defended the user from a halo of blast fire and redirected some of the incoming blasts back onto their opponents. Shien deflection was another stance of techniques familiar to use the Form 5 variant, allowing practitioners to simultaneously deflect weapon fire and leap towards an opponent in the air. However, Shien was not without its shortcomings, and was particularly weak against a singular opponent in single combat, meaning that the Jedi of the Clone Wars era often refrained from using it unless they had completely mastered the form, with only notable masters such as Plo Koon, who was one of the greatest Jedi of that time and perhaps all of time, being able to utilize it in straight one-on-one combat due to the form's weakness against one individual. Some users, such as Ahsoka Tano, employed the reverse Shien grip, an unorthodox variation of Shien where the wielder would hold the lightsaber hilt in a backwards position, exposing the front. This grip allowed the user to perform long sweeping strikes to take down several enemies at a time, as showcased by Ahsoka many times throughout the Clone Wars TV show, whipping the blade forward in a movement of throwing a punch. This variation was rarely seen, however, and indeed almost a matter of controversy among the senior lightsaber masters, including the Battlemaster Sindralig, and such notable adepts and practitioners as well as combatants as Yoda, Mace Windu, and Count Dooku. With regards to the Gem So, the form famously used by Anakin Skywalker, it was the creation of Form 3 masters very similar to its counterpart in Shien, who felt that Cerisi was too passive of a form. It addressed the shortcomings of Form 3 in terms of all defense, in which a Jedi Master could maintain a prolonged defense but was likewise unable to overcome a skilled opponent with an all offense. Using a combination of blocks and parries, a Gemso user maintained a proper foundation of defense against both ranged and melee attacks, while Cerisi users stayed on the defensive and only counterattacked when necessary, or when an opening appeared in the opponent's defenses. A Gemso practitioner was not as passive. Immediately after defending against an opponent's strike, a Gemso stylist followed with an attack of their own, bringing the force of the opponent's own blow against them and seeking to dominate the duel. So effective was this against Makashi users, Makashi being the dueling center form we mentioned earlier, that Count Dooku regarded the force of Anakin Skywalker's strikes aboard the Invisible Hand, while Anakin was amped by the dark side, as being like a meteor crashing down on them, meaning Anakin is one of the most physically powerful characters in all of Star Wars, and would only get stronger as he perfected his Form 5 variation when he donned the suit of ebon armor and became Darth Vader. The Gemso placed a heavy focus on brute strength and pure power, with wide, powerful strikes and parries followed immediately by a swift and devastating counterattack, making it nigh indomitable in battle. Unlike Sarisa of Ataru, the Gemso required the user to not only counterattack, but also to press the assault back, with Count Dooku noting that aboard the Invisible Hand, Anakin Skywalker was always moving forward, each strike a step, and each step a strike, combining force-enhanced strength with powerful blade combinations to overpower and overwhelm an opponent's defenses. The gem shows sheer power, when combined with physical and force-augmented strength, was capable of defeating a user of Makashi, a lightsaber form focused on dueling, finesse, elegance, and dancing, when employed by a skilled practitioner, with Anakin Skywalker battering down against the force reserves as well as dueling capabilities of Count Dooku in his weakened state aboard the Invisible Hand. And although Dooku was past his prime, as we see his prime in Attack of the Clones, Count Dooku still was an incredible duelist nonetheless, and one of the greatest in the entire galaxy. The Djemso attack stance consisted of holding the lightsaber above the head, angled back and down at approximately 45-degree angle. The characteristic Djemso attack was dubbed the Falling Avalanche, a very fitting title, an overhand power blow that crashed down upon the opponent with exceptional force. Jedi of large stature such as Anakin Skywalker, or even Sith of large stature such as Darth Malgus and Lord Scourge and Darth Bane, often chose to utilize Form 5, because it required less agility or speed than other forms of lightsaber combat, and made use of their natural strength and reach advantages. It was for this reason that the Jedi's Battle Master Sindralid commented that the form was very overbearing and very physically exhaustive. And the same reason that the Sith Battlemaster Cassim advised the Sith apprentice Darth Bane to learn the gem so. Bane's imposing size, honed through years of mining on Apatros, as well as his immense physical strength garnered from such exertion, served to complement the form. His power attacks were able to knock his opponents back just through sheer kinetic force alone, even unaugmented, throwing them off balance and leaving them vulnerable for further brute strength strikes and power blows that sought not just to penetrate his opponent's defenses, but also to push them back and leave them unable to counter strikes. However, Anakin Skywalker later commented that all Jedi could enhance their strength with the Force, and thus made usage of Form 5. However, the Jedi with the best natural physical strength could typically augment their strength with the Force the most, and at least had the most overbearing natural physical form, which made the gem so particularly unique as well as effective in the hands of a true brute. Jedi Padawan Anakin Skywalker initially employed Xian in his duel against the Sith Lord Dooku on the planet of Geonosis at the climax of Attack of the Clones, although he later employed Form 4 while wielding two blades in the Jar-Kai motion. Once Dooku managed to destroy one of the weapons, Skywalker was forced to revert to his Form 5 practices. While his skill enabled him to hold his own against Dooku, he was unable to overcome the Count's elegant Form 2 blade work, and was at this time defeated. The many engagements of the Clone Wars, however, against both mechanical as well as lightsaber-wielding Dark Jedi, honed Skywalker's skills to the point of near perfection. During his final match against Dooku aboard the Separatist flagship Invisible Hand, Skywalker deceived the Sith with a Xi'an opening stance and Ataru acrobatics, but during the duel, he returned to his own overbearing Djemso strokes. The Sith Lord was barely able to deflect the Jedi's blows and was eventually scorched when his own blade was pushed back onto his shoulder, cutting into his skin. Using Form 5, Skywalker pushed Dooku back with powerful blows, bolstered by the rage in the fight and augmentation by the dark side. He eventually disarmed and killed the Sith Lord by beheading. After falling to the dark side in 19 BBY, Anakin Skywalker quickly realized that his own form of fighting would never work again, and he learned this hard way. Now known as the Sith Darth Vader, he dueled and was nearly killed by his former Master Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi on the planet Mustafar. Following his cybernetic reconstruction, Vader employed a new variation of Form 5, hybridized with other lightsaber forms that we have discussed previously, even more focused on sheer power, as befitting a cybernetic augmentation. In his service to the dark side and quest to destroy the Jedi, his defeat on Mustafar and subsequent internment in life support armor forced him to alter his style into a new conglomeration, and he incorporated elements of Form 7 Juyo, Form 4 Ataru, Form 3 Sarisu, and Form 2 Makashi into his fighting style, making Vader one of the greatest duels in all of galactic history, and in my opinion, a rival for such Grand Master Yoda in single combat, albeit I do hold Yoda in higher esteem than Vader in terms of dueling. Vader again employed Form 5 on the Death Star against his former master in their final duel, but rather than continuing to fight, Kenobi sacrificed himself, teaching both Skywalkers one final lesson. Eventually, the same techniques utilized by Vader against Kenobi were mirrored and used against him by Vader's own son, Luke Skywalker. In Cloud City on Bespin, just minutes before Vader would reveal to Luke that he was his father, Luke Skywalker was able to hold his own somewhat against Darth Vader for a time despite his minimal amounts of training. Ultimately unable to stand against Vader's aggressive barrage and Vader being extremely conflicted during this altercation, Luke was driven back and disarmed, losing his hand in the process. After the duel, he further meticulously studied lightsaber skills that he found in a journal left to him by Obi-Wan Kenobi, and further advanced his abilities. Later, aboard the second Death Star, although much an inferior duelist and Vader being past his prime, Luke was able to duel Vader to an even footing, mirroring Vader's Form 5 to Gemso technique. When Vader attempted to taunt Luke by suggesting he would tempt Skywalker's sister Leia Organa to join the dark side, the tactic provoked the Jedi into a fury, and in that state, he was able to defeat the far more experienced Sith Lord. Luke responded to his father's aggressive usage with his own furious demonstration of Form 5 technique, battering Vader down before refusing to continue the fight. More than a decade following, he commented that Form 5 needed to have its aggression and desire to dominate balance with compassion. At times, other weapons beyond the standard lightsabers were wielded effectively by Form 5 practitioners, meaning it was extremely versatile in terms of what weapons you could use with it. For example, the Dark Lord of the Sith Darth Bane wielded a curved-hilt lightsaber, a staple of Makashi, but regardless used a gem so. Bane noted that curved lightsabers fit better into the palm, allowing greater power without costing precision. They also altered the angle of the attack slightly, which gave Bane a unique dueling style. It is for this reason that I believe that Bane is the greatest Gemso duelist of all time, save Darth Vader himself. Other weapons wielded by Form 5 practitioners included lightsaber pikes, as shown by the Xi'an practitioner Kazdan Paratas, and saber stars, as utilized by the Jedi Master Zez Kyle. A Jedi Maxim once commented on 4-5, a very unique quote I will quote for you now. Peace through superior firepower. There has never been a purer description of the form. By the time of the Battle of Yavin and 0 BBY, Form 5 had been in existence for countless millennia. The Gemso variant of Form 5 was developed sometime before 4000 BBY, and the Jedi Knight Ulit Keldroma utilized the form during the Great Sith War against Exar Kun. Xi'an was practiced by Jedi Masters Kavar, Zez Kyle, and Vrook Lamar during the Jedi Civil War, while Ulit Keldroma, who lived a few decades prior to the Jedi Civil War as initiated by Refet, favored Djem So. The Cold War era. Jedi Robo Trace was also versed in Djem So, drawing on his knowledge during a brief bout with Sith Blade Master Shaq Weth. During the new Sith Wars, Form 5 was mastered by the Sith Brotherhood of Darkness Blade Master Kasim, who instructed numerous apprentices, including the Academy's finest apprentice until the rise of Darth Bane, a Zabrak by the name of Sirach. He then went on to instruct Bane, who then went later on to best Sirach, and then later kill him. On the Jedi side, Jedi Battlemaster Skach Fong was also well versed in Form 5. To the Jedi of Clone Wars era, the most prominent practitioner of Form 5 was indisputably Anakin Skywalker, who mastered both Form 5 variants, but held a particular penchant for utilizing Djem So to immense effect. During the waning years of the Galactic Republic, and shortly before the rise of the Galactic Empire, Jedi Padawans often spent up to a year or two studying each form from Form 2 to 5. During the invasion of Naboo, Obi-Wan Kenobi showed a basic knowledge of Xi'an, utilizing it in conjunction with the rare reverse script to skillfully deflect blaster bolts back at droidekas, overcoming Ataru's weakness against blaster-wielding opponents, as he had yet to learn Sarisu. Yoda was also a practitioner of Form 5, as he, like I have said previously, had mastered all forms of lightsaber combat by that time. Later, during the Clone Wars, Form 5 practitioners included Jedi Knights Kat Quinn, Ayla Secura, Devon Fordeshel, and Zealous Stern, the Dark Jedi Garth Azar, Sora Bulk, Jedi Masters Adi Gallia, Plo Koon, Even Peel, Luminara Unduli, Kazdan Paratas, and Sin Drali. And finally, the Padawan Ahsoka Tano, who attempted to use the reverse Xi'an grip to devastating effect, and Jax Pavan. Additionally, despite their lack of force sensitivity, the Separatist General Grievous and his IG Magna Guards learned Form 5 from Count Dooku during the Clone Wars, with Grievous downloading every clinical form of lightsaber combat into his partially cybernetic brain in order to randomize his strikes. This being the reason why General Grievous was so deathly effective, and described by the Jedi Master Crook as being virtually unstoppable. After turning to the dark side and joining the Sith, Vader continued to employ Form 5 as his primary form in hybridization. His secret apprentice, Force prodigy Galen Merrick, was also extremely familiar with the form, having personally trained in Vader by its usage. Vader's son, Luke Skywalker, learned Form 5 in part by mirroring the swordplay of his father in their first duel, and the young Skywalker ultimately defeated his father with his usage of Form 5 during their second duel. Although there were factors at play here that I believe need to be brought up, that's a video for another time. When Luke Skywalker later formed the New Jedi Order, he and the Order learned of several combat forms from the book The Jedi Path, holocrons, and recordings, particularly the Great Holocron, which we referenced earlier, which recruited recording by Sindrali, which explained the Gemso in graphic detail. One practitioner of the Gemso from the New Jedi Order was the Jedi Battlemaster Kyle Katarn, who mastered all of the forms of the Old Order. Despite this, there were considerably fewer practitioners of the controversial horizontal or reverse script variation of Xi'an. Around the time of the Clone Wars, Jedi Master Adi Gallia and Padawan Ahsoka Tano were two of the only Jedi known to actively practice it. Though Master Gallia favored both scripts for an aggressive hybrid blend of Xi'an and a Gemso during the Clone Wars, Ahsoka's master Anakin Skywalker even discouraged Tano from merely using it. Jedi Master Luminara Unduli occasionally also used Form 5 of the horizontal grip, with the Anzac Nikos Tyros also practicing the style and training his zealous followers in the form before he perished. Other Force users known to have employed this rare grip variation was the Jedi Knight turned Sith Lord Revan and Jedi Master Quinlan Voss, as well as Darth Vader's apprentices Galen Merrick, Starkiller, and the Dark Apprentice. Similarly, it was also expected, as well as assumed by much of the Star Wars community, that the failed clone Maulkiller, a hybridized variation between the Starkiller DNA and Darth Maul's DNA, was also trained in this variation before he went rogue, albeit this clone would eventually be slain while rogue. It would still be trained in lightsaber combat, as it was regarded as having some form of dueling ability, albeit it was purely savage, very similar to Darth Maul's dueling ability as well, hinting that it may have inherited some of its donor's DNA, ability and affinity for Juya, or perhaps being trained to Gemso by Vader himself prior to Maulkiller breaking out and escaping. Now, we arrive, my friends, at the most practical of all the forms, Form 6, Nyman, the Way of the Rancor, the Moderation form, the Diplomat's form. Described by Sindralig as the most generally practical form, it was the sixth form of lightsaber combat of the 7 forms of lightsaber combat. This fighting style is a hybrid martial art created by effectively combining elements of the preceding lightsaber forms into a single, generalized form. 9 men balance out between the various specializations of the other form, covering many basic moves but focusing on an overall moderation. This resulted in a fighting style that lacks significant advantages, but also any serious drawbacks, with its greatest strength being its lack of weaknesses, and its greatest weakness being its lack of strength, thereby not leaving some adherents as exposed as some of the more aggressive or specialized forms would. Overall, Nightman had fairly relaxed focus on blade work, designed as a simple, easily mastered fighting form for Jedi who preferred to devote most of their time to studying diplomacy. Despite this, it could be absolutely deadly and perhaps the greatest form of practical lightsaber combat when taken to the highest level, as demonstrated by a particular notable, known as Exar Kun, the man who went down in history as the inventor of the double-bladed lightsaber, and nearly up to his time, the greatest duelist in Star Wars history. To compensate for the relaxed focus on blade work and the lack of significant specialization, Nine-Man training regimens encouraged the inclusion of force-based attacks in combat, such as telekinetic pulls and shoves used in sync with lightsaber strikes. Similarly, Nine-Man was developed from 2 pre-existing martial art fighting forms that both emphasize the usage of dual blades, providing a firm foundation for duelists looking to study into such practices. Ultimately, Nine-Man's success in combat was dependent on a practitioner's intuition and creativity in combat, rather than the role or responses common to other forms. Originating for once not in the hands of the Jedi, or Sith, or any Force-based organization, the original Nine-Man fighting style was practiced by the royal Machuretos of the Kashmir dynasty, who named it for the dual triumvirate of the Kashi deities. The style was adopted by the legions of Leto, an army of dark Jedi involved in the First Great Schism of the Jedi Order in 24,500 BBY, led by Zendor. After the defeat of the Legion at the hands of the Jedi, Nine-Man was adopted by the Jedi Order, eventually being refined into the sixth form of lightsaber combat through many millennia, referred to by the same name. While Form 6 was largely adapted from this earlier fighting style, several noted Jedi considered the pure root of Form 6 to be Form 3, being a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none style with broad emphasis and little need for contentious and dedicated practices. Nine-Man found a niche among Jedi consulates, who instead preferred to focus on diplomacy and meditation on the Force rather than combative application. Ironically, Nine-Man became the chosen discipline of the fallen Jedi turned Sith Lord Exar Kun, who invented the double-bladed lightsaber and basically caused Nine-Man and the double-bladed lightsaber to be conglomerated against one another, making the double-bladed lightsaber possibly most effective with the Nine-Man form. During the various wars against the Sith throughout history, Nine-Man was prized for some by general versatility on the battlefield, but heavily criticized by others for being insufficiently demanding. Over time, it became the standard in lightsaber training, and by the start of the Clone Wars conflict, it was one of the most common forms in the Jedi Order. However, Nine-Man demonstrated itself to be inadequate on open battlefields of the Clone Wars, proven when literally every single Form 6 practitioner involved in the first Battle of Geonosis died in combat. Every single one. In the post-wars years, Nine-Man remained studied and practiced amongst the Sith, while the Jedi were hunted down in the Great Jedi Purge. Form 6 lightsaber combat eventually was rediscovered by the new Jedi Order, though until then, it was effectively replaced as the favoured jack-of-all-trades fighting style by the medium style of lightsaber combat, one that we will get to later. Often referred to as a diplomat's form because it was less intensive in its demands than other disciplines, a hybrid fighting style. Nine-Man incorporated elements of the previous forms, mainly Forms 1 through 5 excluding Form 2, but balanced out between their various specializations, in keeping with the Jedi quest to achieve harmony and justice without resorting to the rule of power. Form 6 covered many of the various moves of lightsaber combat, but due to its emphasis on overall moderation, its focus on blade work was somewhat relaxed and very, very peaceful. Thusly, the form was easily mastered by those who preferred to devote a high percentage of their time to study, peacekeeping, and looking into the deeper mysteries of the Force, which made it the preferred form of Jedi consulate, while the generalization made it ill-suited for lightsaber dueling or fighting on the open battlefield. It was perfectly adequate for facing down criminals, thugs, and very specifically, other lightsaber wielders. Due to its jack-of-all-trades nature, the success of the form was largely dependent on a practitioner's intuition, improvisation, and creativity in a combative altercation rather than the raw responses derived from other forms. To compensate for this relaxed focus on blade work, Nine-Man training regimens encouraged adherents to the style to incorporate a plethora of force powers into combat, including telekinesis and force lightning, abilities that would come very naturally to the Dark Lord of the Sith Exar Kun. Proper management of these tools allowed a Form 4 master to control and eliminate an entire group of enemies, though many lower-level initiates experienced difficulty attempting this, as Form 6 lightsaber combat was derived from the dual-bladed Nine-Man style practiced by the royal Machuros of Kakashi Mer. It provided a foundation for challenging practice. However, while hailed as a practical, all-around fighting form, it was heavily criticized by many for being insufficiently demanding. It should be noted, however, that while Nightmare provided no decisive edge in battle, it achieved its worth by not leaving its wielder as exposed to some of the more aggressive forms like the Gemso or Ataru. Due to the relaxed blade work of the form, it was said that most Naiman practitioners would find it almost impossible to defeat a Makashi practitioner, due to Makashi's focus on precision. Albeit I have a feeling if Count Dooku and Exar Kun met on the battlefield, Exar Kun would have no problem making short work of the Count. According to the Jedi Battlemaster Sindrali, if a duelist like Exar Kun dedicated himself exclusively to Form 6, he could expect to study the style for at least a decade before achieving absolute mastery, in which time, the Battlemaster further noted that the practitioner would be absolutely unstoppable, something that Exar Kun took the absolute limit and proved was 100% right. The opening stance for Form 6 was rather wide and open, with the blade held out from the body in a one-handed grip. The blade angled upwards and back while the offhand was folded across the chest. The feet were evenly spaced. Another one of Nine Man's stances featured the blade held at head height in a two-handed grip, angled upwards and slightly in with the dominant foot placed forwards. A third position was a two-handed low guard, with the hilt held at waist height in both hands, blade held back and to the side, angled downwards, with the feet closely spaced. In keeping with the tact of incorporating various force powers into combat, two primary Form 6 practitioners and maneuvers, known as the draw closer and the pushing slash, were conjunctions between lightsaber moves and telekinetic assaults. Effectively polar opposites of one another, the draw closer involved telekinetically seizing an opponent and pulling the enemy into the path of his blade, likely impaling him if the opponent was strong enough in the force to shatter the opponent's force barrier, while the pushing slash slammed the opponent with a force push, soon after scoring a slash across their midsection. Derived from a fighting form centered around the usage of Jarkai dual-blade fencing, Nightmare was considered a foundation for this challenging practice, and became something of a gateway form to Jarkai dual-blade fencing, and would be later used by Darth Krayt, arguably the second greatest Nightmare user of all time behind Exar Kun, to immense effect. Form 6 dual blade encouraging the usage of the short lightsaber in the offhand as a smaller blade was easier to handle. A notable Jarkai master was the Prepulan Jedi Master Ski Willy, who carried 6 lightsabers. He was renowned for his skill in his era, and records of his fighting form were considered a wonder to behold. Many modern Jedi mirroring his attitude, though Dooku was a notable exception, who, in his copy of the Jedi Path, labeled Ski Willy's form and footwork as sloppy. Obi-Wan Kenobi simply commented on his hope that he never had to face a duelist with such an array of weapons. Nine Man was commonly studied by duels looking to brush up on dual-blade combat, though few actually mastered Nine Man itself, save for a few throughout history, who did it exceptionally well. One of the primary reasons behind this was Nine Man, unlike the other lightsaber forms, required at least 10 years of study, if not exceptionally more, and this varied depending on the practitioner, as some practitioners took up to 30 years to fully master the combat form, which, depending on your average species lifespan, could be a large chunk out of your life. Exar Kun, one of the most powerful Dark Lords of all time and one on par with Sidious, chose to specialize in Nightmare, and while there was little doubt that he found the dual blade training regiments useful when he converted his lightsaber into a double-bladed weapon, he often preferred to fight with a single blade rather than the saber staff he had created. His skill marking him as one of the finest duelists of his era, demonstrating he defeated the instructor, the renowned Jedi weapon master Vodo Skabas, in a sparring match, indicating his mastery of the fighting form, despite the fact that Vodo Skabas had been training in lightsaber combat as well as the usage of his force-imbued style for the last 6 centuries. However, rather than adhere to its philosophy of moderation over aggression, Kun was a vicious and pragmatic duelist who favored brutal power moves and had little computation against lashing out against foes with physical attacks, very similar to Jem So, leaning that Kun also had a rudimentary mastery of Jem So and Nine, and blended them together to make nearly a perfect lightsaber form. These tendencies were exacerbated by his turn to the dark side of the Force, when he actively took to drawing on his rage in combat, creating a masterful Force rage. However, while he failed to observe the core concepts of Form 6, Kun was never defeated in a lightsaber duel, and only his fellow Darksider, Ulic Qel-Droma, was able to match him on neutral ground, although I personally believe that Exar overall was a far better duelist than Qel-Droma ever could hope to be. It should be noted that, however, aside from brief sparring matches, Kun was only known to have participated in 3 lightsaber engagements over the course of his career, one against his former teacher, and one against Ulic Qel-Droma. Many Nine-Man maneuvers incorporated the usage of force powers changed into combat sequences to compensate for the relaxed focus of blade work. While he favored Form 5 lightsaber combat, Anakin Skywalker himself had studied Nine-Man and occasionally favored such practices. His master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, also occasionally applied such skills, having studied Nine-Man to learn this tactic himself. Kenobi commented in his copy of the Jedi Path that he found this practice extremely difficult, indicating his need for more practice and tutelage. During the invasion of Naboo, however, Kenobi had evidently developed an advanced level of skill in this application, frequently blasting aside battle droids with a force push while in combat. Ironically, for a fighting form designed to encourage moderation over aggression, Nine Man was the chosen discipline of the fallen Jedi Exar Kun, trained by the famed Jedi weapons master Vodo Skabas. Kun was one of the fireless duelists of all time, even defeating his own master in a sparring match while he was still a Padawan, and was regarded by the end of his career by both the Jedi and the Sith as the greatest duelist in the history of the Order, surpassing even the legendary Tulak Lord, although I may have a different opinion. Adhering more closely to the philosophy of Form 6 was Zez Kyle, Rook Lamar, and Kavar, Jedi Council members active during the Jedi Civil War and the era of the First Great Jedi Purge as initiated by the Sith Triumvirate, who had mastered No-Man sufficiently to act as instructors in the style to the next generation of Jedi, typically teaching the form to the Jedi Sentinels. Jedi Sentinels being a topic I would like to cover one day. During the new Sith Wars, No-Man was practiced amongst both the Jedi and the Sith forces. A notable Jedi adherent was Johann Otho, who took full advantage of Form 6's inherent versatility during the pitched battles of the war. However, during the post-year wars, he made little effort to maintain his skills as a swordsman, instead focusing on various diplomatic talents, and his skills atrophied considerably over his life. The Sith Blade Master Kasim included full mastery of No-Man in his repertoire of skills, and trained a variety of Sith apprentices in the style. It should be noted that while Kasim was very well versed in dual blade combat, using it to great effect against a weaker version of Darth Bane during their duel to the death, Kasim typically relied on Form 6 dual blade training rather than No-Man. Darth Sidious may have mastered No-Man as he had mastered all other 6 forms of lightsaber combat, in addition to being extremely well versed in No-Man's dual blade variation, employing it intensively against Darth Maul's Savage Press. He was also outstandingly adept in incorporating force attacks in his lightsaber style. His knowledge was competent enough to adequately teach his student, Darth Maul, the art of No-Man, causing the latter to become decently capable at it in combat, especially in its function of incorporating force attacks into his dueling style. Obi-Wan Kenobi furthermore studied No-Man during his apprenticeship under Qui-Gon Jinn, attempting to learn how to apply the Force while in the midst of combat, a practice he commented as being extremely difficult, but he had eventually mastered enough to seamlessly force-push droids while simultaneously deflecting blaster bolts. Kenobi's own student, Anakin Skywalker, studied Form 6 to develop his skills with dual blades, though he never commented that he was always working on this mostly as an exercise in control, and was doubtful he would never need to apply it in direct combat, as the gem so granted Skywalker all of the leverage and physical power he needed. Skywalker's assumption was proven wrong, however, when he wielded dual lightsabers against Dooku during the First Battle of Geonosis, and several other times throughout the Clone Wars, representing his skill with No-Man and Jar Kai. Anakin frequently employed his knowledge of No-Man training to incorporate the usage of the Force into his dueling style, and also had advanced his abilities in the form enough to instruct his Padawan Ahsoka Tano in the lower levels of the style as a training exercise. After donning the suit and becoming Darth Vader, he started incorporating elements of No-Man's swordplay alongside the other form after retooling his dueling style and retained his advanced skill in No-Man's techniques of incorporating the use of the Force in combat. Count Dooku, one of the greatest Makashi wielders of all time, also possessed considerable skill in No-Man from his time as a lightsaber instructor of the Jedi Temple, enough so to instruct the Kaleesh cyborg General Grievous in his usage through sparring matches, as well as to coach Grievous while he passed on his training to his IG-100 Magna Guard bodyguards. Dooku applied his mastery of Makashi as well as No-Man to masterfully use the Force in conjunction with lightsaber combat, making Dooku that much more deadly. While Form 6 wasn't a weak fighting style per se, it was inadequate for open battlefields of the Clone Wars. Notably, all adherents of the style during the Battle of Geonosis perished. Prominent practitioners including Sarisa Jane, Sala Buddha, and Joe Klan Danva. Danva's death was an especially sore loss for the Jedi Order, as he was among one of their most renowned duelists and martial artists at the time, and a complete master of dark high dual blade fencing. One of the styles of Form 6 lightsaber combat was derived from and excelled at when taken to the utmost. However, Form 6 adherents and trainees remained with Anakin Skywalker, instructing his Padawan Ahsoka Tano in the lower levels of the style as a training exercise. Tano would later wake to wielding a Shoto in her offhand, in keeping with No-Man dual blade training. Grand Master Yoda and Swordmaster Mace Windu were also proficient and knowledgeable in No-Man, as I have said many times in this video, to have fully mastered all clinical forms of lightsaber combat. Although Windu only ever displayed proficiency in the form's function of incorporating force attacks into his lightsaber sequences and stances. Jedi Master Sin Dralik was considered the most prolific instructor of Form 6, as he was the 5 form below it, teaching No-Man to thousands of students during his Jedi tenure. However, despite his skills and mastery, although he put up a brief but fierce fight, Dralik was ultimately cut down by the Form 5 specialist Darth Vader during Operation Nightfall, as part of the initiation of the Great Jedi Purge and subsequently Order 66. Students of No-Man active in the Purge included Rachi Citra and Vader's apprentice Galen Merrick. However, Merrick chose to devote himself to Forms 3 and 5 rather than 6, although he still incorporated immensely powerful and forceful telekinetic strikes into his lightsaber sequences, a common element in Form 6 training. His clone, Starkiller, made much more avid use of Naimi, actively specializing in the style to develop his skills with dual blades. Starkiller's knowledge of the form was based off inherent memory flashes from his genetic template. And despite the limited battlefield benefits provided by Form 6, it remained in use up until beyond the resurgence and takeover of the Galactic Empire, one of the greatest practitioners of the form ever being the resurgent Dark Lord of the Sith and future Emperor of the Galactic Empire, Darth Vader, the last great Sith Lord of the Legends timeline. Now, we reach the end of our journey, at least the end of our journey regarding the original 7 lightsaber forms. Of course, there are more lightsaber forms pioneered by the new Jedi Order, but at least for now, this is the last of the ones of the original High Republic, with that being the prequel trilogy and the forms practiced during that era. Form 7, much like Form 5, will be divided into 2 separate categories due to the fact there are 2 different variations of the form, that being Juyo, the Way of the Vornskir, or the Ferocity form, or Vapar, the 7th and last of the lightsaber forms recognized for lightsaber combat by the Jedi Council. In use millennia prior to the Battle of Yavin, the Juyo incarceration of Form 7 was described as the most vicious, aggressive, and potent form of lightsaber combat, and was said to involve a significant internal focus on part of the user. Pioneered primarily by Darth Sion around that time period at the time of the First Great Jedi Purge. Juyo had many practitioners throughout the year, including notable Jedi Masters Kavar, Zez Kyle, and Vrook Lamar. Due to its relatively high focus on one's internal emotions to gain dominance in combat, Form 7 oscillated from simply looking down upon to outright being seen as taboo. Knowledge of Form 7 became restricted among the Jedi Order to only its highest master, who members were worried that the precepts would lead to practitioners towards the dark side. In contrast, members of the Sith, such as Darth more particularly, employed Juyo without reservation, as did dark acolytes such as Galen Merrick. In the latter days of the Galactic Republic, around the time of the Clone Wars conflict, a new variation of Form 7, dubbed Vapad after a creature native to the planet Sarathir, was created by Jedi Masters Mace Windu and Sora Bulk, 2 of the most premier Blade Masters alongside Dooku and Yoda. Vapad was explained as being more of a state of mind rather than just a simple fighting discipline, allowing the wielder to channel their inner darkness into the duel and accept the opponent's fury, creating a superconducting loop to empower one's force abilities. Windu, Bulk, Windu's former Padawan Depa Billaba, and the Jedi Maverick Quinlan Voss were 4 notable practitioners of the Vapad variant, with records of both Juyo and Vapad surviving the Great Jedi Purge, and were eventually recovered by Luke Skywalker's New Jedi Order, who preserved the records of Form 7 into the Sith Imperial War. Despite there being 2 different incarnations of the form, Juyo and Vapad, both utilize bold, direct movements. According to accounts compiled by the New Jedi Order long after Mace Windu's own death, the usage of Form 7 was more demanding in terms of energy, used to garner a broader focus and deeper utilization of emotion. A Form 7 practitioner was said to maintain a calm exterior appearance. Still, they were also said to experience significant internal pressure while using the ferocity form. In addition, it was described as sometimes paradoxical and unpredictable, and filled with concepts that made the form too difficult and unattractive to many students among the Jedi and even the Sith. Juyo was described as the most vicious form of lightsaber combat, and was said to be filled with both fury and malignant grace. The form was given the title of the most difficult and demanding form in all of lightsaber combat due to the sheer force power needed to execute it. Skilled combatants with Juyo were said by Jedi Master Vrook Lamar to be able to eviscerate a lone enemy near instantaneously. In fact, it was designed for such a purpose in one-on-one lightsaber altercations, which of course, as we know, the Sith particularly relished in. According to the Sith Lord Darth Traya, the master of Darth Sion, who was one of the main protagonists of the form was both chaotic and erratic, with a heavy focus on offense, and using techniques believed to have been rejected from Shicho in the earliest days of the Jedi Order. Juyo's use was controversial among the Jedi Order, as many felt that Juyo violated the "there is no emotion, there is peace" tenet of the Jedi Code, due to its requirement to fight under the guidance of controlled and labored passion. The Sith had no such inhibition, however, and Darth Sidious went so far as to label it a Sith style, and that any Jedi who used it might as well be indoctrinated into the Sith Order. The Jedi Battlemaster Sindralig listed bold, direct motions as characteristics of Juyo, qualifying them as more open and kinetic than Form 5 to Gem So, but with less elaborate appearance than Atari. Dralig contrasted the tactics of Juyo as not nearly as graceful or linked with those of Atari, instead referring to them as seemingly unconnected Sagdato sequences. Also, he listed one of the strengths of the form as its unpredictability. The form is said to necessitate greater energy than Form 5 itself due to the broader wielding of the user's focus, and a deeper emotional link being extremely taxing. Despite the challenges inherent in using the form, it could serve as a pathway to considerable and immense power within the dark side. Moving on to its later variation, Vapad was described as more than a fighting style when it was created by Mace Windu and Sora Bulk. It was a state of mind led through the penumbra of the dark side, requiring the user to enjoy and relish in the fight, relishing in the satisfaction of winning against an opponent. The practitioner of Vapad would accept the fury of their opponent, transforming themselves into one half of a superconducting loop, with the other half being the power of the darkness inherent in their opponent. The form was also mentioned with a cautionary warning by the Jedi that the usage of the pod led the user perilously close to the dark side due to its focus on physical combat, with only notable masters such as Mace Windu being able to utilize the form to absolute mastery without falling to the dark side, albeit Quinlan Vos could count as a close second. The pod required a constant and sizable stream of force from the user, with a barely contained explosion of force power essential to all variations of Form 7 as another prerequisite for its usage. The form's attacks appeared to be unconnected, its motion seemingly unpolished to an untrained observer. However, if one was trained in the form, as Mace Windu noted himself, an adept such as General Grievous, one who could randomize all of his strike with all clinical 7 forms of lightsaber combat instantaneously. If he was to ever learn Form 7, he would be virtually unstoppable. During the later years of the Galactic Republic, Jedi Master Mace Windu developed Vapad with the aid of fellow Master Sora Bulk by drawing inspiration from the movements of a creature known as both the Vapad and the Juyo native on the planet of Sarapin. Vapad users appear to wield many lightsabers at once simultaneously, with even the Wizards of the Coast website noting that a duel between Mace Windu and Luke Skywalker as of the new Jedi Order series would be an extremely interesting and close one. They were moving too fast to see, just as the Vapad creature would attack with blindingly fast tentacles that were impossible to count until the Vapad was dead. A Vapad user's attacks would flow into each other with liquid precision, creating the constant near-invisible weave of energy which was the ready stance of the form. It was also possible to apply Vapad in unarmed combat, with the user's arms becoming too fast to see, as well as in the use of dual lightsabers. While observing the duel between Darth Sidious and Mace Windu in the Chancellor's office, Anakin Skywalker considered Windu's Vapad blade work to be an oblate sphere of purple fire, and believed that Windu no longer existed as an independent being, containing dozens of blades attacking from every single angle. After his fall to the dark side before the Clone Wars, Count Dooku described the power of Vapad as skirting the dark side of the Force itself, but stated during an altercation with the fallen Jedi Sora Bulk that the form was brittle and weak without direct use of the dark side. Dooku later subverted Bulk to his cause as one of his dark acolytes, and after Bulk's fall to the dark side, he claimed he had perfected the form by giving himself fully to the darkness, which Windu disputed while engaging Bulk in a lightsaber duel. While Bulk had previously practiced Vapad with Windu, he was unable to defeat him in combat, and the duel ended in stalemate. Though Windu and Bulk were credited with the creation of the form, the seventh lightsaber form was known, albeit obscurely by the name Vapad, as early as the end of the New Sith Wars by the Sith Blade Master Kasim, hinting it may have existed thousands of years prior to Mace Windu and Sora Bulk's idea and inception of the form. Millennia prior to the Galactic Civil War, Juyo was ascribed the moniker of the Ferocity form due to its aggressive nature. Jedi Master Zez Kyle claimed Juyo was highly effective against an armed opponent, though much less against a foe skilled with the use of the Force. Master Kavar, a college of the aforementioned Jedi, advised Juyo for use in quickly overwhelming a single target, as well, but cautioned that if one left vulnerable to the Force, attacks such as those employed by Dark Jedi of this era prescribed caution and control when using Juyo, and were reluctant to teach it to those who were known with recklessness, as even the form's ferocity could lead them down the path of the dark side. Juyo was said to be able to destroy even the defenses of a Form 3 master even more effectively than Jijem So, but the practitioner was left vulnerable to counterattack in the process, partially from multiple opponents and force powers. According to the Jedi Battlemaster of the prequel era, Sin Drali, who served in the final days of the Old Republic, Form 7 was sufficiently demanding that only masters skilled in practicing multiple other forms were capable of using it effectively. Dralik stated that the mastery required to learn Form 7 was such that only a select few would be able to utilize it. He forbade its study to all others save a few in the Order and the High Council. At least 2 users of a pod variant during Dralik's tenure described the form as dangerous due to its focus on physical combat and intensity. For his part, Dralik refused to allow Anakin Skywalker to study Juyo, a wise choice. At the same time, Obi-Wan Kenobi, despite being one of the most reserved and wise Jedi, was likewise forbidden to learn Vapad by Qui-Gon Jinn. Windu also discouraged Quinlan Vos from learning Vapad when Vos tried to replicate the sequences Windu was using in a practice sparring duel, learning from Vos that he learned the move from Bulk and warning him against doing it again, due to Vos already being perilously close to the dark side due to his maverick nature. Jedi Master Mace Windu, who developed Vapad along with the weak way Jedi Sora Bulk, stated that Vapad was the answer for his own weakness, allowing him to channel his own internal darkness into something positive he could employ in the midst of combat. Furthermore, he said he would not allow the use of the form without his permission, something that he had only given to his apprentice Depa Billaba. The Jedi Master Siri Tachi once explained to her Padawan Ferris Olam that the reason Mace Windu was able to dismiss the pleasure and power which Vapad brought was by acknowledging it and being constantly aware of it, not by dismissing it. Windu wielded the form in numerous battles throughout his career, especially in the Petranaki arena against bounty hunter Jango Fett, where his relentless usage of Vapad overpowered Fett. While engaging Darth Sidious in 19 BBY and being extremely amplified in terms of power by the Dark Lord's Shatterpoint, the Sith Lord quickly brought down Mace's three Jedi companions. To combat Sidious's furious technique, Windu gave himself entirely over to the currents of the Force and thus submerged himself into Vapad. He allowed it to fully channel his inner darkness, and accept and utilize Sidious's darkness to fuel the superconducting loop we mentioned prior. When fully immersed in the form, Windu's fighting prowess was such he could allow his body to fight automatically for him without the need to direct it with his mind. Sidious's own fury was used and redirected by Windu via the usage of Vapad, a process which Windu mentally likened to a lightsaber deflecting a blaster bolt back at its source. And in this stage, Windu was more powerful than Sidious was. After Windu disarmed Sidious, the Sith Lord attempted to blast him with Force Lightning, but Windu responded once more by employing Vapad techniques to channel the dark power of the lightning through him, without it affecting him, albeit with great difficulty. He then redirected the blade and lightning back to its source. However, Windu believed that as his use of Vapad alone was insufficient to defeat Sidious, he felt that it would only result in a stalemate. It should be noted that while the sequences and maneuvers of Form 7 could be practiced and drilled, a duelist would not be truly executing the style unless they allowed the excitement and passion of battle to colour their actions. The Form 7 opening stance with a one-handed high guard with the blade held horizontally above the head and pointed to the side. The body was half twisted, with the offhand swept across and down. Juyo users were proficient in the technique called the Assured Strike, wherein they traded sheer power for near certainty of landing a hit. Another technique they used to refer as was the Vronsky's Ferocity, which involved a ferocious attacking of an opponent. Wielders of Juyo were capable of employing this move without allowing the dark side's influence to pervade their aggression. Those skilled in the Vapad form were known for their swift flank technique, where they leaped or dashed around an opponent and make a quick and swift devastating strike. The speed of the maneuver was intended to catch opponents off guard. Similarly, they were also skilled in tempered aggression, a term used to describe the ferocity of the Vapad form, but with more control against succumbing to the dark side even in the heat of battle. Juyo was an established form of combat 4 millennia prior to the Battle of Yavin around the time of the First Great Jedi Purge. Jedi Masters Rook Lamar, Zez Kai El, who I'll mention about 30 more times in this video, and Kavar were all skilled in its usage and were able to pass on their experience to their students. Jedi Master Atris, who fell to the dark side during the event of the First Great Jedi Purge and unwittingly led to the Jedi Order's brief extinction, was also known to employ the form. Jarek Kaidan, a Jedi Master who fought in the Great Galactic War, was a master of the form, which was known as Juyo Kos by that time. It was considered a living weapon guided by the will of the Force itself, very similar to the Outlander. Other Great Galactic War combatants, Jedi Master Nostoral and the Sith Lord Scourge, also employed Juyo to various degrees. The Sith Blade Master Kassim was a master of all 7 forms of lightsaber combat near the end of the New Sith Wars, and the Sith Apprentice Sirak, who was stationed on Korriban and speculated to be the Sith Ari during Kassim's tenure there, was known to incorporate Juyo thrusts and jabs into its fighting style. Another Sith Lord of that era, who would eventually grow to surpass Sirak, Darth Bane, was proficient and masterful in the usage of Juyo, although this was not his primary style, as it was to Gem So as we mentioned previously. During the New Sith Wars, the use of Juyo caused many Jedi to fall to the dark side and join forces with the Sith. As a result, the Jedi Council restricted the usage of the form to all but none. And in that time following the end of the conflict, the Jedi Battlemaster Scutch Vonk trained Juyo to only a few hand-picked students each year with incredibly high willpowers and dark side thresholds. Darth Sidious had achieved utter and complete mastery of Judo, and his competence was great enough to train Darth Maul in its use to devastating effect to the point Maul was able to kill Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Maul's inner aggression complemented his usage of the form, and he used it as his primary method of lightsaber combat, paired with his saber style. He drew heavily on the dark side to gain the ability to overwhelm opponents through sheer ferocity. His most notable usage was in 32 BBY, when engaging Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and Jedi Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi in Theed simultaneously, showcasing the ability to adapt Geo to the usage of a double-bladed saber staff. Maul's usage of the form was enough for him to fight both highly skilled Jedi at once, despite Geo's weaknesses to multiple foes. When he engaged them one-on-one, Maul quickly broke through Qui-Gon Jinn's defenses, allowing him to stay the Jedi Master. However, Maul was devoted to the physical aspect of Form 7, as the Sith saw a purely physical victory over any enemy, no matter how numerous. But by the Clone Wars, Maul grew out of this, now incorporating the Force into his attacks. He was able to fully master Juyo. His skills could overwhelm the defenses of even Kenobi, one of the greatest masters of Sarisu ever, and as a matter of fact, Form 7 had fewer practitioners than any other style, due to its difficulty, complexity, and demands. Jedi Battlemaster Sindralic, as well as Grandmaster Yoda, had immense knowledge and mastery of all 7 forms, including Juyo. Befitting Dralig's role as a lightsaber combat instructor at the Jedi Temple, and Yoda's reputation for being the greatest lightsaber duels in all of history up to that time. Alongside this, Anun Bundara, another lightsaber instructor, also possessed rudimentary knowledge of the form. The Lannic Jedi Master Evan Peel was familiar with all 7 forms of lightsaber combat as well, including Form 7. Furthermore, his Padawan, Jax Pavin, had some knowledge of the Juyo form, which he learned during his time in the Jedi Order, although the extent of this knowledge is unknown. Another practitioner of Juyo was the grizzled Jedi General Ram Koda, who survived both Order 66 and the initial outbreak of the Great Jedi Purge. Mace Windu and Sora Bulk, who co-created the Vapad variant of Form 7, were particularly skilled and knowledgeable in the usage of Juyo, enough to together perfect the form of Vapad. Darth Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Merrick, was proficient in the usage of Juyo, with his concentration and aggression being enough to bring down opponents with sheer tenacity. His application of Juyo was also laced with sudden force-based attacks in the midst of combat lightsaber sequences, making him highly unpredictable. Marek used the form in both a vision of himself while on the planet of Kashyyyk, and against the fallen Jedi Master Maris Brood on Felucia in 2 BBY. Marek's droid companion, the lightsaber instructing droid Proxy, could use an imitation of the form, albeit without the Force, which he fought while dueling Marek in the guise of Anakin Skywalker. After his defeat on the Duel of Mustafar, Vader himself studied the intricacies of Form 7 and became a master of it, at time applying elements of Geo as part of his customized variation of Form 5, employing some of its techniques when he killed the Resistance fighter Roan Lance, who was a good friend of the former Jedi Furless Olin. Knowledge of Geo in the book The Jedi Path and records compiled by Jedi Master Sindralig was eventually passed on to the New Jedi Order after the Great Holocron was rediscovered. The New Jedi Order then preserved this information into the Sith Imperial War. The Magistrix Karis of Sky adapted Geo, mixing it with traditional Skyari aerial techniques to create the rare variant known as Trisets, which we will get to another day. With regards to Vapad, we equate Jedi Master Sora Bulk, already considered one of the Order's finest lightsaber practitioners and skilled in all 7 lightsaber forms, helped Mace Windu perfect Vapad in the later years of the Galactic Republic. Following the Battle of Geonosis, Bulk became disillusioned with the Galactic Republic and enamored with the dark side. As it was later said by Windu, Bulk did not master Vapad, Vapad mastered Bulk. Before falling, Sora Bulk also taught Quinlan Vos some maneuvers from Vapad when the amnesic Kafan needed retraining. Vos would later demonstrate his new talents inadvertently during a practice session with Mace Windu, who instantaneously recognized his move as a part of Vapad. Windu abruptly halted the duel, warning Vos never to use Vapad again, as Vos was already considered to tread too closely to the dark side due to his maverick nature, for him to safely envoy Vapad. However, while Vos was serving as a double agent for Count Dooku during the Clone Wars, he was encouraged by Bulk, who had by that time allied with Dooku as a dark acolyte, to take up Vapad's power again. Mace Windu, in his private memoir, expressed concerns and suspected Vos had mastered Vapad to a degree greater than the Kifar revealed. During the siege of Saleucami, Dooku, Bulk, and Tol Skor prodded Quinlan Vos to give himself over to the dark side, and furthermore to Vapad. Vos thereby demonstrated his level of mastery of Vapad in his duels with Skor and Bulk, defeating both in clinical lightsaber combat and completing his mastery of the flow of light and dark mastery of Vapad, requiring an exemplified when Vos was freed by Bulk's Force illusions. The only student Mace Windu ever taught for Pod 2 personally was his Padawan Depa Billaba. Under Windu's construction, Billaba became a master of a pod, with Windu considering her virtually unbeatable in personal combat. While on a mission with her master to Nar Shaddaa, Billaba and Windu were forced into a deadly confrontation with a mutated giant Ak. They barely survived the encounter, and Windu would later comment that on that day, Billaba had shown blade work that surpassed his own. While on a mission to Harun Kar, Billaba fell to the dark side, allowing the blood fever of the jungle and the pull of a pod to take over and dominate her mind. Mace Windu was forced to travel to Harun Kal and face his student in an altercation, with Windu discovering the only way he could survive against his former Padawan was to give all of himself to the pod, but realized that if he did, he would fall to the dark side as well. Turning away from the dark, however, Windu conceded to fight, personally opening himself up for Bilaba's killing strike. However, Bilaba, seeing what she had become, attempted to take her own life, but was stopped entirely by an outside intervention. While engaging the Skyborg General Grievous on Coruscant during the Battle of Coruscant aboard a moving train, Windu again displayed his mastery of a part. Grievous responded by mimicking Windu's style, which resulted in what Windu considered a passable imitation of the form, which made Windu shudder. Grievous had then instructed his personal IG-100 Magna Guards in all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, including Juyo. As with Juyo, knowledge of form symbols was recovered from the Jedi Path and the Great Holocron by the New Jedi Order, who preserved the information into the Sith Imperial War. And even knowledge of a path, yes, that's right, the one created by Mace Windu and Sora Bulk, was passed on to the New Jedi Order and held into the Sith Imperial War, with Luke Skywalker possessing immense knowledge on the form of a pod created by Mace Windu. But what happened after the outbreak of Order 66 and the fall of the Empire? I would be lying if I said Luke improvised his way to Grand Masterhood, as he most certainly didn't. He had a rudimentary understanding of the gemstone and Cerisi from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, but outside of this, Luke Skywalker basically had to start from scratch when reconstructing his Jedi Praxian. And he started by dividing Jedi lightsaber forms prior to the re-emergence and rediscovery of the old lightsaber forms into 3 particular ones, mastered by both him, Kyle Katarn, and many other acolytes of his Jedi Praxian. The first one we will be reviewing is the Strong Style. The Strong Style of lightsaber combat was a style used by both Jedi and Dark Jedi during the New Republic era, including Kyle Katarn, Desan, and possibly the Jedi Knight Jaden Korr. Described as utilizing powerful strikes to batter through defenses, the Strong Style was primarily based on wide, powerful movements to batter through an opponent's defenses, sacrificing speed for unrivaled power and force. It was so potent it could inflict more damage than the other lightsaber forms of its time, which, coupled with its range, made it especially effective against singular opponents armed with melee weapons. The style was quite destructive, and if a practitioner was presented with an opening, they would almost always land a devastating blow that was near fatal. Utilizing the strong style often led one to open to counterattacks, putting them at disadvantage in terms of speed comparisons against faster and more agile opponents such as Tahiri Vila or Darth Zana. Although a sufficiently skilled practitioner could mitigate this, such as Kyle Katarn, it was not suited for deflecting blaster shots as the stance required the user to shift the blade a bit to cover the body. Thus, it was almost solely utilized in lightsaber combat only. Users of the strong style like Katarn typically utilize an aggressive stance, the lightsaber held high and back, ready to deliver powerful swings. Practitioners with remarkable physical strength, such as the Dark Jedi Desan, used a one-handed variant of the style to great effect. Very similar to Darth Vader, Desan was able to batter down the defenses of all he came across, utilizing his immense, unrivaled physical strength. The strong style emphasized offense, as the stance and wind-up for each time and swing left the user very open for counterattack, making this form basically the Achilles heel to Makashi. Defense was limiting to the user swinging their blade to intercept and overpower their opponent's strike, or blocking it and then disarming the opponent, usually with a sharp spin of the blade. Due to being powerful but slow, the style benefited considerably from the usage of force speed, which allowed it to keep up with other notable force wielders. Sharing some features with other aggressive styles associated with the old Jedi Order, especially the strength-oriented Form 5 to Gem So, it also displays similarities to the Juyo subset of Form 7, which likewise sacrificed defense for the sake of a more formidable offense, the wide sweeps of Shi Cho, and Makashi for its precise movements. Elements of Atara also seemed incorporated, most notably in its opening stance, sharing immense similarities to the form used by the ancient Grandmaster Yoda. But what was the next style? As I said previously, there were 3. The next style we have was the medium style. The medium style of lightsaber combat was a style used by the New Jedi Order Jedi such as Kyle Katarn and Jaden Korr. An intermediate style between the fast and strong styles, the fast we will go into soon. The medium style was based on perfect equilibrium between speed and power. More often than not, the medium style was the first taught to a lightsaber duelist to garner a complete equality within the force and combat. It was a simple in technique, yet more technical and powerful forms could be built from its foundation. Users of the medium style would typically utilize a neutral stance, the lightsaber being held in medium position in front of the user, ready for both defensive and offensive maneuvers. The medium style struck a balance between powerful but slow strings of the strong style and the short but swift strikes of the fast style capable of cleaving opponents in two. The medium style was very simple in design, and that is both a strength and a weakness, very similar to Nightman. It was an excellent style to fall back onto when nothing else worked, and could provide a respectable offense and defense, as well as effectively combat blasters and hold less skilled lightsaber duelists at bay. However, more skilled gunslingers such as Boba Fett, or more talented lightsaber duelists such as Luke Skywalker, would very rapidly break a medium style defense due to their sheer mastery of their respective arsenals. The same holds true in offense, as a skilled duelist would rapidly destroy the user's momentum and counterattack. This style bore immense similarities to the Shi-Cho and Nine-Man forms of the old Jedi Order, both combining elements of multiple combat forms, yet being quite simplistic and basic, however extremely potent when elevated to the node of the true master. And now we have the last form created by the new Jedi Order, the fast style, utilizing short and quick motions with a blade that could be chained and combined almost indefinitely. This style allowed for multiple attacks at an exceptionally fast pace. Utilizing a defensive stance where the lightsaber was held in front of the user, ready to parry attacks, to deflect blaster shots, or to launch short, fast jabs and cuts against the opponent. The style's main advantage was that it is effective in one-on-one combat against slower opponents with lack defenses or multiple opponents who are not wielding melee weapons, especially when combined with force speed. Among the three styles, this provided a solid defense against blaster fire akin to its forebearer Sarisu. In lightsaber combat, the user could also effectively defend themselves against multiple opponents or a single, stronger opponent. Relying primarily on speed and multiple attacks at the same time like Ataru, the fast style had certain disadvantages. Firstly, its attack focused on speed, which limited the amount of power behind the blows, making it easy for a strike to be parried or overpowered. Secondly, its attack range was considered shorter, forcing the practitioner to take down multiple opponents one at a time unless they grouped closely together. Third, the style's fast offenses could be quickly broken by an opponent with superior physical strength, such as Darth Vader or Dark Jedi Desan or Inquisitor Jarek. Since the blade was kept so close to the body, a strong, cunning opponent would simply hammer the user's blade in the hopes that the practitioner would tire and leave themselves open for fatal counterattacks. This style bore particular similarities to the Sarisu form of the old Jedi Order, since practitioners kept the blade close to their body for a very rapid and effective defense against melee weapons and blasters. It shared immense similarities with Ataru, making use of acrobatic movements and rolls to strike an opponent from unexpected angles. Tavio and Aximus, while possessed by Michael Ragnos, used a variant of the fast style that had many similarities to that of Shien, being more aggressive and offensive than the fast style that is used by Kyle Katarn. The fast style enabled a very fast parry or trap shunts, allowing the user to trap and then redirect an opponent's strike to knock them off balance in the midst of combat, an incredibly advantageous moveset. Moving on, there are various other fighting forms that we will not have time to go over in this video, however I'll run through them pretty quick. There are unorthodox and hybridized fighting methods, with Dooku noting to Grievous that standard attacks was random, and that you need to use the unorthodox in combat against a Jedi. There were many fighting styles that predated or coexisted with the classic Jedi form, that were adopted by individual Jedi duelists. In fact, study into some of these more esoteric fighting forms, such as Sokan or mounted lightsaber combat, were made available within the temple walls. Similarly, Jedi were encouraged to develop hybridized fighting forms to gain utter mastery of their own particular form, or either to do this or study alternate fighting styles to back up their primary one. Such fighting forms have taken many shapes, from a simple personalized variation of other styles to advanced hybridized fighting forms that construct some of the greatest duels of all time. For example, Nine-Man practitioners were encouraged to study Sarisu, the pure root of Form 4. Obi-Wan Kenobi began to study Sarisu to compensate for the defensive weaknesses of Ataru, while he eventually switched entirely to the former. However, other duelists discouraged such hybrid methods, a notable being Count Dooku. While Dooku advocated the application of unorthodox maneuvers, he focused exclusively on Makashi and referred to the hybrid duelists as mere dabblers lacking mastery over one particular form. He even went so far as to smear Jedi battle masters for this, maintaining that their attempts to master multiple combat forms was taking on too much, and they could still be beaten by a specialist in one singular form like him. One of the facts supporting this viewpoint was the death of Battlemaster Sim Dralik at the hands of Darth Vader, a Form 5 specialist, despite Dralik having mastered every conceivable form. Vader himself would later become a lightsaber duelist sometime after being placed in his life-supporting armor, integrating techniques from all 7 lightsaber styles into his personal Form 5 variant, making him a titan of the dark side and nigh unstoppable. I mentioned this briefly earlier. What was Tripset? Tripset was a combination of the elements of Form 7 and the traditional Skyari aerial dueling. Tripset was a type of aerial lightsaber combat originally developed by the airborne force-sensitive Magi Strix of Sky, Karis. Tripset was meant heart palpitation in the Skyteric language and would allow the combatant to utilize the advantages of flying in battle against grounded units, whom the Skyteri would derogatively refer to as walkers. In Tripset, emphasis was placed on the usage of the side char technique to decapitate these walkers. Tripset had many advantages, one fatal weakness, as the combatant was open to attacks from directly below him or her by grounded units. Kyle Katarn took advantage of this weakness when, dropping to the ground and lunging his lightsaber upwards as Maul passed over him, he injured Maul during a duel on the planet of Ruusan. The same battle of the Ruusan Reformation took place, and the annihilation of the Brotherhood of Darkness via the Thought Bomb ritual. Next, we have Trikada, sometimes known as the 8 forms lightsaber combat. The Trikada style was based around the unique ability of lightsabers to turn on and off, activating and deactivating the blade in the heat of combat to slip past enemy defenses, or trick them into overextending themselves, leaving themselves open for fatal counterattacks. Philosophically, Trikada involved practical combat and deception, rather than the more traditional single-minded and determined tactics that were the hallmarks of the Jedi and Sith Order. Sith had difficulty applying this style, as their power came from passion and rage rather than level-headed tactical ingenuity, and the Jedi refrained from this style due to their unwillingness to rely on deception, as it went against their moral code. Similarly, deactivating one's lightsaber during combat offered greater control over the Force due to the removed distraction. Following this, we have Sakan. For the most part, Sakan was the principle of lightsaber combat rather than a true form. Developed by the ancient Jedi Knights during the Great Hyperspace War heralded by Naga Sadow, Sakan teaching revolved around the usage of the environment itself to gain a tactical advantage in combat, and was used primarily by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Satele Shan in respective engagements with multiple opponents. Sakan was based on all-out maneuvering opponents, using quick tumbling and jumping movements to close the distance and facilitate swift strokes towards the opponent's vital areas. Terrain compatibility was relied on heavily for this purpose, and allowed for great speed and mobility, similarly facilitating self-defense. Prior to the Clone Wars, Sakan practitioners integrated highly kinetic elements of Atari with their ancient Sakan techniques to create a pure blend of styles that relied upon agility purely. The next one we have is quite interesting. Telekinetic lightsaber combat. The art and practice of wielding one's lightsaber with force-based telekinesis. It was exceptionally difficult and only possible by the highest echelon of force wielders and telekinetic masters, requiring a great aptitude in such application of the force to truly master. The primary advantages of such a fighting form were obvious. Range ceased to be an issue, and the option of wielding numerous lightsabers simultaneously became a viable option. The most basic application of telekinesis in lightsaber combat was the saber throw technique, using the force to guide the lightsaber arc through the air, which Darth Malgus used in the sacking of Coruscant against Ven Zallo. Users could throw their lightsabers in a boomerang fashion, cutting apart obstacles and surprising foes, and sometimes even cleaving through their foes entirely. More adept users of such a technique could hurl their lightsabers across great distances, make mid-air course corrections, or simply allow their lightsabers to hover in place. Next, we have Dun Mok. Dun Mok is something that many in the audience will know well, a traditional Sith ritualistic tactic based around psychological warfare and mitigation of one's peace in combat. Primarily, the practitioner relied on taunts that exposed an opponent's inner doubts and weaknesses, disrupting their concentration. Proper execution of Dun Mok called for great patience and control, a rare trait among the Sith themselves, especially those of the earlier eras. One of the finest demonstrations of this technique was in Darth Bane's defeat of the Zabrak Sirak during the time of the Sith Academy on Korriban, demonstrating the need for patience by drawing out the battle to take advantage of Sirak's lack of endurance, and exhiberating fine control by withholding from striking an early killing blow as Sirak's form began to slip. Rather than settle for a quick victory, Bane sought to completely destroy and humiliate Sirak, allowing the tantalizing closeness of victory to fuel his rage, and eventually unleash it in a powerful blow that disarmed Sirak, ending the duel. Following this, we have the notable Form Zero. Form Zero was not actually a form of lightsaber combat, but rather an ethical principle, an expression of an idea that the Jedi should know when to use their lightsabers and when to withhold from resorting to the Force and instead find an alternative means of solving the problem like diplomacy. The idea was defined by Jedi Master Yoda to address the need of Jedi to restrain themselves when tempted to use aggressive negotiations, as he called it, and instead use another well-developed Jedi skill, such as the Jedi mind trick, in order to mitigate hostile affairs. This was the method used to arrive at a solution without resorting to violence multiple times throughout the High Republic era, when peace was in plenty. The Lusmar, however, was quite obscure. An obscure lightsaber technique that even the most die-hard fans of Legends would not know. Lusmar was one of the fighting forms that Count Dooku trained Grievous and his IG-100 Magna Guards in, beyond the fact that one of these initiates used Lusmar to counter a Ceresi's movement. Next to nothing is known about the style besides what we just mentioned. Sumar is quite the same, using the rotation of a Jedi Knight's form of lightsaber combat, as it was composed by three forms. One, the Ton Sumar, was the use of somersaults in combat. Another, the En Sumar, was the use of cartwheels in combat. Next, we have weapon-specific fighting forms. Due to the incredible myriad of variations in lightsaber technology over 25,000 years and the various specialized weapons available, fighting and training methods for the use of these various implements were required. Most weapon variations were fairly minor changes in the size and shape of the lightsaber hilt, with the effects of combat being negligible. Curved hilt lightsabers and light foils allowed for greater precision and accuracy, and easier one-handed wielding, while long-handed lightsabers allowed for improved leverage and power, with Darth Vader and Exar Kun utilizing these long-handed lightsaber grips. Dual-phase lightsabers allowed for rapid changes in blade length, and could be used to surprise enemies, but required no dedicated methods of specialized training beyond personal familiarity. However, other variations on armor, such as double-bladed lightsabers, or the wielding of dual blades, light whips, or various others, required intense specialized training due to the difficulty in using such weapons. However, if mastered to a T, it truly allowed a user to rise above 99% of all lightsaber duels of their day. Now we get to one that I think everyone in the audience knows, that being Jar Kai. Jar Kai, the style of dual blade fencing developed by the Yovin swordsman, was a name for a city on Astracel. The city of Jar Kai was also the site where the original Jar Kai dueling sabers were crafted. These weapons were utilized by the Yovinshin and were designed for the express purpose of being dual wielded in combat. Naiman, the dual bladed style developed by the Royal Massachos of Kashi Mare, was named the dual triumvirate for the Kashi deities. The style was adopted by the legions of Leto, an enormous army sect of Darksiders responsible for the first great schism of the Jedi Order led by Zendor, who would eventually be reincarnated into the Dark Underlord. After the defeat of the Legion at the hands of the Jedi, Nightman was adopted by the Jedi Order, eventually being refined to the sixth form of lightsaber combat we know as today, referred to by the same name. Both styles predated the invention and usage of lightsabers, but were designed to be practiced with force-imbued blades and swords, and they were easily adapted. In addition, the word Jar Kai became a blanket term for dual blade fencing in general, leading to the birth of the term Jar Kai tactic, which was simply to employ two blades in combat, regardless of whether one had received any training in any dual blade fighting style. Dual blade fighters, whether classical 9-man duels or individuals applying the Jar Kai tactic, were able to maintain a strong offense, as the speed of attack that two blades allowed would overwhelm most opponents quite swiftly. A typical maneuver was to continually attack with one blade, or relying on the other for defensive coverage, ensuring that the duels would keep up his guard even as he attacked. This was used by both Anakin Skywalker and Cal Sendarak to varying degrees. However, it was common that both blades be used for offensive purposes, keeping up a continuous wave front assault. Though a complete fighting system in and of itself, Jar Kai was easily adapted to other styles. After beginning her tutelage under Tarth Tyrannus, Asajj Ventress quickly applied Makashi techniques to her practice of Jar Kai, as Makashi was Tyrannus' favoured form. Jedi Master Luminara Unduli was able to analyze his training techniques and Asajj's fighting abilities, stating as much. Mace Windu similarly infused Jar Kai tactics into his own Vapad style, while on a mission to Harun Kar, his former apprentice Depa Billaba, doing likewise in order to combat her master. Be wary, my friend, as we only have 3 more analyzations of combat to go before this video is over. So this is my daily routine to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. It takes an exceptional amount of time in order to compose these videos, writing scripts and getting the vocals just right, as well as getting all of the images in place to make this an enjoyable watch through. So a subscription would really help. I would really like to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, so I'm finally monetized and I can get all of that money. I mean, make more videos for all of my fans. Anyway, on with the video. With regards to the light whip, wielded in the same manner as a proper whip, the light whip was a rare and exotic weapon, an unfamiliar occurrence among traditional duelists. Due to this, light whip wielders often enjoyed a considerable amount of leverage over opponents. Along with its rarity, light whips also featured copious range, the long flexible energy strand allowing the wielder to attack from a range of several meters. This weapon was also difficult to defend against, as it could simply flex around an opponent's blade when he attempted to parry the attack. When multiple tassels were included, the whip was able to overwhelm the defenses of enemies by attacking them from all sides. However, light whips featured as many drawbacks as advantages, among one of which was the light whip blade was difficult to control, able to as easily maim an untrained wielder as an opponent, and was weaker than the standard lightsaber blade. It needed to be swung to gain wide momentum for attack, and was difficult to use defensively as flexible tassels are not well suited for parrying, leaving the wielder vulnerable to both great speed and brute force. In fact, light whip blades were not even known to short out violently when struck with enough force, very similar to normal lightsabers with cortosis blades. But what about lightsaber pikes? Resembling an ancient pole arm in many respects, the primary purpose of the lightsaber pike was to allow vastly increased range. Its primary feature of the weapon was the long shaft that the lightsaber was mounted on, which was machined to form a lightsaber-resistant alloy, such as frick. The shaft provided several advantages: drastically increased range, using a close quarters defensive weapon with the large surface area of a shaft being able to quickly block enemy strikes, and the improved leverage granted by such a large handle, allowing wielders to dole out devastating power attacks while defending against other blows. However, like the double-bladed lightsaber, which we will get to shortly, the weaknesses of such a weapon and the associated combat styles were obvious. The long shaft made many positions and movements awkward, sometimes nigh impossible to execute. It did not transition well between thrusts and slashes, and required plenty of open space in order to wield properly, very similar to a Taro. Now, we get to what I would say is possibly the most famous lightsaber in all of Star Wars. Here is a quote from Blade Master Kasim that goes very well with the double-bladed lightsaber. In combat, your mind tries to keep track of each blade separately, effectively doubling your number of possibilities. But the two blades are connected. By knowing the location of one, you are automatically aware of the location of the other. In actual practice, the double-bladed lightsaber is more limited than the traditional lightsaber. It can do damage, but it is less precise. It requires longer sweeping movements that don't transition well into a quick stab or thrust. Because the weapon is difficult to master, however, few among the Jedi or Sith even understand it. They don't know how to attack or defend effectively against it. That gives those of us who use it as an advantage over most of our opponents. The primary purpose of the dual-bladed lightsaber or saber staff was to allow for a faster rate of attack, unleashing a rapid, powerful assault with only a minimum of movement, more slaughter per swing, as some put it. Saber staffs were also excellent defensive weapons, as the double length of the weapon provided more surface area for deflecting and parrying the blade. In addition to the practical benefits of the weapon, it also possessed great psychological impact. The dual blades increasing the visual impact of the weapon, and in combat, opponents would intuitively try to keep track of the blades separately rather than as a single weapon, overwhelming them and their cognitive abilities and ultimately leading them into stagnation and stress, which ultimately, in the case of Qui-Gon Jinn, get you killed. However, despite all of the advantages offered by the weapon, its weaknesses were extremely obvious. Specialized training was required to wield the weapon effectively, with Darth Maul taking decades in order to gain a rudimentary understanding of it, with those attempting to use it without such discipline likely to bisect or impale themselves rather than their opponents. The techniques employable with the double-bladed lightsaber were extremely limited, as the second blade rendered many positions and movements impossible to execute, or required the wielder to twist himself awkwardly around the weapon to do so. Many techniques require the user to perform elaborate flourishes in order to move the staff around their body, leaving them open, and any sort of fighting method that focuses on power and penetration difficult to apply. Similarly, the enlarged hilt common to most double-bladed lightsabers presented a large target, difficult to defend. Opponents would often attempt to employ the cylinder gem contact mark, and even experienced saber staff wielders being vulnerable to this tactic. The Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi executed this in the Phantom Menace against the Sith assassin Darth Maul, bisecting Maul's lightsaber and ultimately leaving Maul prone to an attack. Although Maul was able to save himself from being absolutely dominated by lightsaber combat in this instance, and enraged-fueled Kenobi, he still lost due to his arrogance and overconfidence. Maul should have killed Kenobi then and there. He certainly was able to, and it would have just been a mere hair's breadth away from death had Maul not been so arrogant. Well, my friends, that just about wraps up this over 3 hours and 5 minutes of dissection of lightsaber combat. Tell me what you think about this video and if you want me to do more like this. I was tempted to split this one up into multiple parts, but I realized that the hardcore lore experts in the comment section as well as the YouTube feed would much more prefer it if I did an enormous 3 hour breakdown and dissection of all lightsaber forms. A holistic examination, if you will. So, my friends, this is where we part ways. Tell me what videos you would like me to do in the future. And, as per usual, the Force will be with you, no matter how mysterious or dark the path ahead may seem.